Interesting. Okay, so we'll keep our eyes out for them. But in the meantime, hey, David Arell shared the slide, the philosophy of Kenneth Smith in the chat. There are only two kinds of philosophy, just as there are of religion, existentialist and escapist. Parable 306, the good soldier, that's from Kenneth's book Minotaur, which he has not finished and it's not published yet. But some of us have drafts that are trying to help him along. It's like, come on, otherwise the webs are great, but can we have some more books? And he's like, I don't know, I'm working on something new. Hey, if you talk with Kenneth, he's always working on something new. I'm working on this painting, but I had to set aside another painting that I started, and then I started researching this book, and then there's this crazy writer I discovered, and oh yeah, I have six new ideas for books, and it's a wonder we get finished things from him.
So which one are we? Existentialist or escapist?
Well, we're studying in the medieval worldview, we're studying a tug of war between an existentialist version of Christianity and an escapist version of Christianity. And these relationships during the medieval period are paradoxical. The one that is actually existentialist looks like it's escapist, and the one that's actually escapist looks like it's existentialist. So this is what a great question, Sharon. There's going to be a lot to talk about this. But why don't I do a little bit of basic orientation first? This is our 186th session of Millennia Microcosm. Thanks to everyone for joining us. There's the link to the text we're going through in chapter 9 of Kenneth Smith's previously written but not yet published and forthcoming book, Millennia and Microcosm. And we're in the medieval civilization section. And the summary that David wrote for us this week is the deepest failure of fideism is its evasion of philosophy's central task, to know oneself and the world soberly as they actually are, not as fear or desire preconceives them. And boy, doesn't this go right back to what David just shared up above about the Kenneth quote about there's two kinds of philosophy, existentialist or escapist. Fideism, in other words, David's summary is arguing that fideism, conflating religion and faith and claiming that they're the same thing and that they're indispensable to each other, is ultimately an escapist thing to do. There are more sophisticated forms of faith and religion that are existentialist. Um, it's possible to have one or both in a different kind of confirmation. But when they're equated with each other, religion is faith, faith is religion, then it becomes fideism and we get into trouble. Now last week in the comments, Stephen shared a comment from David, which I'm going to share because it's sort of an expansion on this point. And as part of our intro, I thought let's do both of these. Fideism, the founding of religion on blind faith alone, is a philosophical regression. It assumes knowledge without inquiry, trading the rigorous self-examination of classical philosophy for the comfortable somnambulism of dogma. It dwells entirely in a wish world, animated by infantile emotional drives, the longing for divine approval, the terror of punishment, heaven and hell, and never once turns a critical eye on whether these drives constitute genuine moral or spiritual truth. Where the Greeks carefully distinguished between mere subjective feeling and true inwardness, Christian culture largely collapsed that distinction, flattening radically different forces into one muddy conflation. And before we get into the text today, what David wrote here, which is drawn from Kenneth's writings, and thank you again, Stephen, for sharing this last week. It was right on point, and it's still on point. Because I saw last week everyone's like, "Hey, Stephen, that's brilliant. Thanks for writing that." And you're like, "Hey, David shared that. I didn't write this." And it's true. This is David's summary, and of course it comes from Kenneth. I mean, you recognize the use of terminology and the line of the argument. But we had some pending topics last week, which I got to wait for Joe and Ari to bring up again. But there was also I wanted to kind of have a meta comment about the recurring theme that we've been having these weeks, and it's as follows. I'm gonna narrate a bit just to I spent some time prepping. A recurring theme these weeks has been about how our epoch, modernity, ideologically programs us to take for granted what it needs for its continuation, to format, frame, and entrap our minds before we begin asking questions, to ensure all questions we ask, even in a spirit of hostility or revolution, end up presupposing answers that keep us inside the frame of the epoch and its worldview. Once an epoch has consolidated its worldview and its methods of acculturating us, there's not a single value-laden vocabulary term that retains the meaning it once had under the previous epoch. All of them have been incrementally, convergently, systematically, and completely redefined according to the new epoch's worldview. This includes transforming and reorganizing the relationships among those words and concepts, pre-formatting certain trains of thought as persuasive and other ideas as seemingly nonsensical. Thus, modern English is not a more recent or up-to-date or better English, despite the name. It is English that has been modernized. Its speakers, in learning the modern language, are themselves modernized until we can no longer easily think medieval or classical or indigenous thoughts or value the things our ancestors once valued. Once we've been modernized, if we can any longer perceive their ideas at all, they now seem crude, superstitious, inchoate, absurd at best, and gibberish at worst. But more often, they simply seem to be saying something modern, perhaps a primitive form of something modern. We read Aristotle and we think he's saying the kinds of things we would say if we were Aristotle and using those words. That they might be saying something that legitimately calls into question our entire way of life and value system, that they might see clearly our own Achilles heel is inconceivable to us. So, because we've been modernized. So we read them as saying anything but that. A large part of this process involves de-discriminating the language and thus our store of concepts. So distinctions obvious to previous epochs and perhaps critically important to understanding our own are erased by equating distinct terms as synonyms, hiding the conceptual space that used to exist between them through a process of closure, what we might call conceptual closure. This is part of how we create lacunae in our worldview. As there used to be a space between two things, now we've equated them, and now that space disappears from our ability to think about the world. Multidimensional concept spaces, such as the sophisticated classical concepts about free will and determinism that are in the Greek concept of the daimon and ethos, character, are flattened into caricatures, utterly unable to represent any longer the vast range of possibilities that were once obvious to everybody in those epochs. Modernism, in particular, loves zero-dimensional thinking based on sports metaphors, such as left versus right or moderate versus extremist, all of which are cartoons designed to prevent us from being able to think about one another's differing political positions with any kind of nuance. Everybody becomes a caricature, even ourselves. And the possibility of clearly describing the whole range of possible combinations of political ideas, that capacity drains away from us. Everything has to fit into one of these Procrustean beds that we've created. So in this framework, we were talking last week about Hannah Arendt as just like we were talking about Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and other existentialists and Kenneth Smith about the thing that they do, which is to take things that in modernity we have equated and we think there's no space between them, and they separate them and show that they're actually completely different things, and that in that conceptual space between them often lies the key to understanding what the hell those things actually are in a way that we couldn't when we were equating them, when we took for granted the way that we'd been formatted by our culture. So in chapter 9, which is what provoked this, Kenneth is doing this on faith and religion. He's saying we've all been taught that religion is faith and faith is religion. But before the medieval epoch, nobody believed that. Indigenous people don't believe that. That's not a classical ancient people never believed that. And who knows how many other epochs there have been with their worldviews. There's no reason to think any of them thought that. It was a medieval invention. And modernity, in overthrowing God as a source of authority and replacing it with parliaments and markets and other human institutions, it has, on the one hand, rejected the religious the religious centering of the medieval worldview. But on the other hand, we have accepted their terms for thinking. And so even an atheist thinks that faith and religion are the same thing. And will when criticizing one, will frequently use the other term as a synonym for it. And they don't even understand that that the kind of atheism that they are is not a true atheist. It is a flavor of atheist who has already been acculturated within the conceptual space of the religion that they're claiming to have left. The idea that faith and religion are the same thing is a medieval Christian idea. The atheist who insists that they're the same thing and he's against them both is a medieval Christian atheist. It's the weirdest thing that you could be against the thing while still being immersed in the thing. But that's what it is when your conceptual space has been pre-formatted. When
Well,
all
that was
these,
Nietzsche, wasn't it?
yeah, that was Nietzsche. That's right. That's right. So, it's hilarious. And it's tragic for us. But it has a certain irony that an atheist might be more medieval Christian than he is atheist, even while he's rejecting medieval Christianity. He doesn't understand that he's taken for granted all these ideas about what is the soul and its relationship to the body. My dad doesn't believe in the soul. But as I tell him on our walks, the soul that you don't believe in is the medieval Christian soul. You're a particular flavor of atheists. You are as much medieval Christian as you are atheist, but you can't see it because you're accepting its terms. So we talked about that, and we talked about how how Kenneth Smith got a bunch of this habit of drawing these distinctions. Some of it's from the Greek, some of it's from Hegel, some of it's, as Stephen points out, from Nietzsche, some of it's from Hannah Arendt. And we talked about Hannah Arendt a lot last week, and some of the distinctions she makes that surprise us on the one hand, but also typically will enrage us. Sooner or later, Hannah Arendt's going to call into question something that we have invested ourselves in. And then we also join the angry mob with the torches and pitchforks because she's not a joiner, and she wants to make the distinctions that need to be made in order to understand things. So she distinguishes, antagonism against Jews on the one hand from anti-Semitism. Says these are obviously not the same thing, which would come as a great surprise to most modern people. Whether the modern people are anti-Semitic or whether they're opposed to anti-Semitism, they mostly agree that these are the same thing. The idea that they're two completely different things that couldn't even remotely be confused with each other, or at least shouldn't, it will piss off both the anti-Semites and the anti-anti-Semites. How dare you tell us that we're completely misunderstanding this? You see the same thing with her discussion of in we're talking origins of totalitarianism here. She distinguishes race thinking from racism. And for us, that's gibberish. Race thinking is racism. That's where it's all the same thing and we're against it. Or it's all the same thing and we're for it, depending on which side of the divide we're on. Of course, we assume there's a divide and there's two sides. This is the zero-dimensional thinking that moderns slip into. And she's like, no, race thinking has been around for ages, but racism is a political movement. The idea that you would use race thinking as a basis for your government, she says, very persuasively in Origins of Totalitarianism, is a new idea. And she makes her case. She proves she gives evidence of all these previous cultures that had race thinking, but dude absolutely rejected the idea that you'd incorporate that into your government. Just like she does with, hating the Jews versus thinking that that's a party platform and that you should organize your government around it. She's anti-Semitism is a new thing, hasn't been around very long. People have been hostile against Jews for a long time, going back thousands of years. But anti-Semitism, she says, is a new thing. And we don't, these distinctions rub us the wrong way. She's shaking up our world. We have drawn a lifetime of conclusions from these pre-formatted assumptions our culture has baked into us. And the last thing we want to hear is that we could be overlooking the obvious. We could be absolutely equating things that are completely different from each other. She has a go, for example, we were talking last week about authority versus power, which she talks about in her essay, What is Authority? But one of the big things that she talks about in Origins of Totalitarianism is she goes after the superstition of left versus right, also moderate versus extremist, which is laid down on top of left versus right. She says these things are like they're like astrology. They're like phrenology. They're like trying to predict the future by looking at the intestines of a goat. I mean, They're terrible models for describing the world. And one of the way that you know they're terrible models is that nobody can agree on what they mean, right? They mean whatever you want them to mean. When the left talks about what the left is and they describe the left, you see an entirely different picture from when the right describes the left. And it's not just that, one likes them and one doesn't, that they have neither of them has any clear idea or any documentation about what exactly these things are supposed to be. As she points out, they used to mean something, right? In the lead up to the French Revolution, the big debate about where is France to go from here? Are we to preserve the modernity but somehow hem it in and leash it, or are we to overthrow, the monarchy? Sorry, did I say modernity? I meant monarchy. Is about, are we preserving the monarchy or are we replacing the monarchy? Is it, let's have a constitutional monarchy, or is it heads should roll? And they couldn't agree. They all agreed something had to be done because it was absolutely intolerable, but they couldn't agree on what it was. And so they separated into two tennis courts, the left court and the right court. And that was the origin of the terminology, left wing and right wing. These terms meant nothing before that. Nobody used them in politics. But then they meant something. And the problem for us today is we don't have a monarchy. We haven't been ruled by a corrupt monarchy since time immemorial, and now we're desperately trying to figure out how to leash the monarchy. All of these things we try to pour into these left and right categories utterly don't belong there. But we have an enormous emotional attachment to these identities, and we have equated ourselves with left or right or moderate or whatever flavor, whatever brand we've linked ourselves to, and we've become as irrationally insistent about it as the Coke versus Pepsi people. This is my brand and this is who I am. And how dare you say that this brand doesn't fundamentally mean anything? This is my whole you're saying my whole political identity doesn't mean anything, and that's not acceptable. And Hannah Arendt, she doesn't know what to say other than I don't know what to tell you, except that none of this stuff is relevant. She likewise antagonizes everybody when she talks about Nazi Germany and a Stalinist Soviet Union. And here she half agrees with Stephen and half disagrees with Stephen. And where she agrees is she says, everybody says that the Nazis are fascists and that the Stalinists are communists or socialists. He says, but she says, if you actually study in any detail fascism under Mussolini and compare it to Hitler, they don't match at all in countless ways. And it's not a surprise that late in the war they fought each other. They actually went to war against each other. The Axis broke up and the Nazis invaded Italy because fascism is hostile to whatever it was that Hitler was, and Hitler it was hostile to whatever it is that fascism is. And she says the same thing is true about Stalinism versus Leninism. Says it may be politically convenient to people trying to lump everything into the same categories to say Lenin and Stalin and modern American Democrats are all exactly the same thing. She says, but that's a million miles from the truth. And she lays out all the evidence and says, Lenin had this series of policies and plans that he set in motion. And when Stalin got in power, he overthrew all of them. And not only did he overthrow all of them, he had executed all of Lenin's guys, all of them. It's like nobody could be more hostile to Leninism than Stalin. And when you compare Stalin to Lenin, you have to think these are two radically different forms of politics. And where the weirdness comes in, and this is where she completely agrees with Stephen, if you then compare Stalinism and Nazism, weirdly, they have an enormous amount in common. The one side is flying swastikas and claiming to be right wing and marching and goose stepping and Heil Hitlering. The other side is they've got the hammer and the sickle and they're claiming to represent workers' rights, but they're both doing massive amounts of purges of their own people. They're sabotaging everything they supposedly believe in. They're becoming these cult movements with figures on the top who personally hold power over everybody else. They defy their own constitutions, even the constitutions they officially order to be produced. They produce them, they hang them up on the wall, and then they break every tenet of them without changing them, as though to say the power does not reside in the system. The power resides in my hands, mine. I wield everything. And this is her conclusion in The Origins of Totalitarianism. She says Nazi Germany is not a right wing movement, and Stalinism is not a left wing movement. They're both totalitarian movements. And everybody's been confused ever since because the outward symbols that they're using look like one thing, but what they're doing is something else. And that, she says, is one of the defining characteristics of the third thing that they are. Totalitarianism is a con game, it's deceptive. It lies about what it is. You can't trust it. Now, this pisses off the left. This pisses off the right. This pisses off the centrists. This pisses off everybody. Everybody's pet theories get thrown out the window by what she has to say in the origins of totalitarian. So nobody likes her. We don't want the distinctions made. We don't want the blind spots in our perception of the world opened up and revealed to us because it makes us feel foolish. Now, if if we accepted that Homo sapiens is a fool, if we accepted that to err is human, that we're living in a very complicated world, and as Stephen says, we have evolved for certain circumstances that we left behind us long ago, and we are well into our area of incompetence, with these manufactured worlds that we never evolved to be effective with. If we can accept this, then we can accept the idea that we're pretty fallible and we're going to make a lot of blunders, and it's natural that a lot of what we think is wrong. And if we can accept that, then we want to have these closed spaces in our conceptual world opened up so that we can see where we're wrong, that we want to grow, that we want to overcome our current set of beliefs. When Nietzsche writes, man is a problem that must be overcome, among the many things he means is man as he exists today is full of problems. Wouldn't it be nice to overcome those problems? I think it would be nice to overcome some of them. Maybe some of them are baked in, but maybe some of them are stupid decisions that we made and that we could unmake and we could do something better. We should grow and evolve, but that requires being willing to admit publicly where we have blundered in our conception of ourselves and the world and nature and God. And the problem is, most of us are egotists. And the last thing in the world we ever want to do is admit that we're wrong about anything, especially anything important. So when someone like Arendt comes along and very calmly says, it's funny that you should think that, Nazis and fascists are the same thing. Let's look at a side-by-side comparison of what Mussolini did and what Hitler did. Aren't they different? That's really interesting. A lot of us, those of us who have a philosophical bent are tickled. We go, ooh, I never knew that. I never did this side. I thought I'd thought about these things, but now that I look at the evidence side by side, I can see that I have blundered. I like it when I find a place I've blundered. Here's some place I can grow. This is fantastic. But if you run into an ideologue, because the ideologue says, no, no, you're wrong. This is let me recite for you the catechism that I've learned about how the world works. And now I insist that you repeat the catechism back to me. And if you don't, then I know you're a problem and put up your dukes. Let's fight. This is the ideologue's reaction. It's like, no, my ego, I know all things. I'm like a god. When I know things, they're absolutely right, and I must not have them questioned. It is weird how much egotism there is here. But and now we go back to the original point David was making. Fideism is a kind of escapism because it says the things that I have faith in, as a mortal, a fallible mortal who blunders in all kinds of other ways, I've decided that in this I can never be wrong. If I have faith in it, it's right. It's true because I said so. Now, they don't say that part out loud or think it consciously, but ultimately that's the argument that I'll go to hell unless I will it to be true. And I don't want you trying to shove me into hell. So if you try to question what I am trying to will into existence, then put up your dukes. Let's fight. This is the centerpiece of my faith, and you see how escapist this is contrasted with forms of faith that are organized the other way around. The rock and roller cola wars. I can't take it anymore. Billy Joel, thank you, Stephen. That's right on. You see how this contrasts with an authentic existentialist faith that says, yeah, to err is human. We get a lot of things wrong, and we should always be trying to grow. We should not be trying to defend the limited scope of our current set of beliefs. We should try to dilate our minds to the astonishing glory of the cosmos and the sacred, right? We know that it's bigger and more complex than we are. We're the ones that have to do the work to open up and look at the bigger world and accept the possibility of a bigger world. It requires humility. It requires a willingness to question certain things. Uh, this is all this is all bound up in what we've been talking about for the last 3 weeks. Making these distinctions like authority versus power or faith versus religion, and saying, I refuse to play along with the equation. I refuse to play along with the closure that eliminates the whole vast range of possibilities that used to exist between them by just equating the two terms with each other and saying there's nothing, there's no difference, there's nothing in between. We've refused to play along with that, and we open the space up. We dilate our concept of the world and our capacity to make critical discriminations between things that might actually matter to our survival or to our ability to be good people in the world, but that we can't act on as long as we erase them. Donald, go ahead. I saw you had your hand up. Come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I think I might lead the discussion astray. You know, there's a like this primary distinction of existentialist versus escapist. Certainly, we get that, but there's some just being existentialist is puts you maybe on the right side of that big divide. But there's a there are people, philosophers that call themselves existentialists that don't have, I guess I'm say not what they don't have, but what Kenneth's existential philosophy finds essences as a fact. And there are these sort of blank sheet existentialists that for whom as an existentialist, what they find is it's will, and I can make myself into anything, and I can do this. And I think that's why I lowered my hand. I think we're leading off if we're not trying to discuss the tree of existentialism, but it is key that when Kenneth says he's an existentialist, one of the first things this person that's thrown into the world finds is they're not a blank sheet. They're an acorn. They're going to grow into an oak tree, metaphorically. And they need to learn what human archae are. What are the principles that guide human life so that they can come to some concept of understanding of human virtue. Because, because and so just don't, I just for like, well, we're all existentialists now, well, be careful. I think there are pretty pernicious branches of that call themselves existentialists, but they are in a sense ideologues because they proclaim as a principle that cannot be questioned what it is we existentially must find about the world. Instead of actually finding the world, they find some ideas about the world that shape their philosophy. And
Hmm.
that's way more.
No, but that's great, Donald. And it really underscores the core point. Language is a major tripping point for us. And yet language is the tool we have to communicate with each other about these things. And where we because our languages have all been modernized, most of the clear terms we need to distinguish these things from each other are missing. And the equation takes this other form as well that you're talking about, where a term might mean one thing and somebody else comes along and decides it means something else and they become popular and now everybody thinks it means the second thing, and we've lost the ability to even refer to the first thing. It's been erased by the presence of the new thing. And so Sartre, when Sartre proclaims his existentialism, it is an entirely different animal than Aristotelian existentialism. But
Yeah, exactly my favorite example.
I could hear you. I could hear you thinking about Sartre when you
You
started
know,
off this.
when it's really will and shape, use your own will to shape yourself,
Right,
that you have no essence.
right. Which is a hilarious idea, right? It's hilarious in part because it presupposes, it makes an assumption they present themselves as being free thinkers who are pushing back against the modern world. But in fact, they're starting by assuming the most central modern tenet, which is that we have no character. The human being is just a tabula rasa, and we become whatever we do. And we all our choices make us who we are. That this is all the argument that there's no character in us. And the Greeks were,
Uh,
oh no, there is character in you, and it binds you whether you like it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, whether you agree with it or not. It's there, and you have to grapple with it.
Toothpaste,
Go ahead, Stephen.
or the human being is just toothpaste who will pass easily through the pipes we construct.
Except for the ones who don't, and those ones we put in prison. Right? It's the funny, the modern conception is we can make of you anything that we want. You are 100% acculturable. The tabula rasa, the blank slate, as Sharon puts in the chat. That's the core of the modernist conception of humanity. Pico della Mirandola, right? The unfinished animal. We're the work of art that we ourselves get to finish. Which the problem with which is it underplays. I mean, it's true to a part. It's a partial truth. But where it lacks truth is that it ignores how much we didn't choose about ourselves that's binding upon us anyway.
I understand that there is that element in certain strands of modern thought. I don't know if you could say it's the entirety of modern thought goes in that direction, but
I agree. I agree.
broadly speaking, in society, there is this tendency to view the person or want the person to be infinitely malleable. It's coming from capitalism. It reveals itself in certain types of political movements.
Democracy. Yeah. We'll just all get together and vote, and once the decision has been made, we'll all just go along with it. Right? Because we don't really believe in anything. We don't really stand for anything. So whatever the majority wants, we all want. Isn't that how that works? That's our nature, right? As you say, toothpaste. Okay, that one's gonna. Okay, I actually have to stick that into the human nature as toothpaste. I got to stick that into the chat. I don't ever want to forget that, Stephen. Thank you. That's the modern conception of human nature. And Kenneth wrote about this and has talked about this with regard to his own children. He said one of the clearest, and Donald knows where I'm going with this. Kenneth said it's David knows too. One of the clearest ideas that he got about character came when he tried to raise his kids and discovered that he didn't so much have to raise them as get out of the way, help them along, but stay out of their way. So each of them was becoming a different person from the others. He couldn't make them into little Kenneths or little Angelas. They were going to be whoever they were going to be, regardless of who he tried to make them. And if he tried to impose his will on them and treat them as toothpaste, the most he could do is wreck his relationship with them. Because one of them's an acorn, but another one is something completely different, is going to grow into a completely different thing. And he kind of had to let them and just try to nourish them and help them along. And that was all he said that was the best he could do. And that gave him the clearest possible illustration of Aristotle's point that the modern conception of essence is a land of theory. The Aristotelian conception of essence is your actual natural character, not what anybody says it is or theorizes it is, but what's actually in there. What is that? That's the essential part of you. And whatever it wants you to grow into, whether you thought that was you or not, whether other people think that's you or not, whether it agrees with theories or violates theories, that's what you're going to try to grow into, all things being equal. And that's why we're all different people, is we've each got a different essence at work in us. But as you point out frequently, Stephen, and you're dead right, essence has been redefined in modernity to mean completely different things. And so we have these conversations where it's not clear what, one person is trying to say one thing and the other person hears the opposite.
The risk with the word essence is an idea for us, an idea we're imposing on reality.
Mhm.
Often it works in physics, but they don't understand. They think they've found the real essence. Probably Kant would have something to say about it. They seem to believe they found the real essence of something in their ideas.
Exactly.
Which they used to say could be true of mathematics. They used to believe that about mathematics, but they're not too sure about that anymore.
Yeah, the 20th century shook that up, didn't it? Yeah, I mean that's the issue in a nutshell is the essence of something we impose by our theory, which is the modern conception, or is the essence of something its own inner nature imposing on us, whether we like it or not, which is the classical conception. And the answer is, well, we don't know, but what we do know is that essence is one of the words that means something completely different to moderns than it does from medievals, than it does from ancients. And probably it means something different to different indigenous people and different worldviews. I mean, however many worldviews there are, essence is one of those terms or the equivalent of essence that has to be redefined in order to reinforce the worldview of that epoch. All the terms, all the value laden terms get redefined. And essence, right up there with free will and determinism and man and God and nature. It's on that list. It never is left unmolested by the acculturators. Because if they don't redefine it so that it points centripetally back into modernity, it becomes one of the main escape valves that could lead people to rebel against the status quo in a way that could be meaningful. It has to be redefined in a way that erases the possibility of escape from modernity, and that's how the labyrinth is formed. Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind. Welcome to the call.
So good to be here. Can you guys hear me? Am I coming in loud and clear? Okay. I think so. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I don't want to derail anything, but I'm afraid it might be derailing, but it's more like a question. I feel like we've been circling around this a lot, so I'm not sure if I'm on point or not. It starts with this thought of existential philosophy as a dichotomy, either against escapist philosophy is the one way, but the classic I thought was called analytical philosophy. So is analytical philosophy the same thing as escapist philosophy? That's also a big question. But I was thinking, like, really in this a discussion that came up last night that I got into an interesting debate about, because again, from a neuroscience point of view versus a classic point of view, these are two different things. And I'm biased towards the neuroscience point of view, and it's this idea of what is versus ought. Is what is in the idea of neuroscience. I'm claiming this from, like, there's two states of attention. There's the here and now molecules where you're present and you're with other people and you're in the local scenarios, or there's the other things where you're abstracting and you're stuck in your head and you're overthinking. And these are two different styles of attention. And this sounds like the is ought thing. The is just me participating with everybody around me and just being in the world and not really judging or thinking about anything. And ought is me putting a layer of judgment on top of, like, abstraction. Is this supposed to be this way? And then, of course, it's really like a simple thing, like is what is right now. That's like the time marker says here, and ought says the time marker must be anywhere else, because is can't be ought. Ought has to be different than is. But of course, it's not about a time thing. It's not about time. That's also a weird rabbit hole. The idea is there's a reality we're in, and we're, like, not living up to the ideal. It's like we're all supposed to be soccer players, yet we keep still handling the ball with our hands, right? That's not what it's supposed to be. So in that is ought distinction, now let's go back to the existential versus analytical. I feel like they're almost making redefinitions of what is and ought are. Like, because the existentialist, or excuse the analytic guy, I'm thinking like a math guy, like almost like Einstein's coming up with theory of relativity. Theory of relativity sounds like abstraction, things about like what ought to be, but he's really trying to figure out what is, right? He's trying to look at what is actually out there, but he comes up with this crazy model of something that's abstractive, that sounds very analytical. And then he's like, no, that's reality. That is existential. That is reality. Like, oh, well, I thought that was analytical, but now you're telling me it's existential. And then on the other hand, there's this idea of existential says all models are incomplete and some are useful. So let's just live in the world that is, and what is actually, or at least maybe I'm wrong here. This is where I'm getting messy. Is sounds like what it ought to be. Everything's out there, existence. Well, that's what it is. Well, that's the way it's supposed to be, because there is no supposed to. It just exists. To say supposed to be anything is you making up a story on it. Maybe there's a story it has, but you don't have access to that story. So this gets to the next part of what is existentialism is saying, well, there is no story out there and I'm just making up a story and that's also the way what is? Or is there a story out there that I don't have access to, but I'm trying to make up a story and hopefully my story aligns with that story? Or is it something like, not like that at all, where like these are still abstractions. I'm still thinking like an analytical escapist, where I'm just trying to model reality as opposed to just succumb and let go and just be like, this is what it is, and just deal with it. But at the same time, when you go, but we've had this conversation before, when you really get into the nuance, like Kenneth is doing a lot of analytical stuff. He's doing a lot of quote unquote escapist stuff. But it's in the difference is he's using the analytics in service of his existentialism, right? As opposed to I feel like an analytical philosopher would say all this existential stuff only works because it's in the model of what I think ought to be, right? So he's talking about the is in the service of ought, and then the ought is in the service of, but I feel like they're also confusing the is and the ought. I feel like the existentials are saying, no, what ought to be is just is. There is no ought. It's just is. So it's like the is and the ought are the same thing. I don't know if that's true, by the way. That's maybe overly reductive and I'm getting into it. So I would love Stephen to parse my incompleteness here and tell me all the things that I did well or didn't well. He listens nicely. So do you. But the other version of this is like, I'm analytically thinking about these things, but I'm trying to be in the world. You're like, am I really an existentialist? I'm an analyst. So it's like they're really a dialectic, and it's like which one is serving the other as a master. And I feel like maybe the ideal version of this is they take turns, but depending on context. Sometimes you need to be an escapist to get outside of yourself, but that's so you can get back into being an existentialist. And sometimes you need to be an existentialist so you can get into some analytical stuff. I don't know how to explain this, but I feel like they need each other. They're like, again, like a dialectic. They bring each other into being, and you can't have one without the other. But one seems to dominate the other, or pretend the other doesn't exist. Or, I mean, they have interesting relationships. Maybe it doesn't have to be like that, but they're in a relationship. And I was wondering, to get this a soft landing, about the relationship between, maybe they don't work at all. And maybe I'm going this whole rabbit hole for nothing, but the is-ought thing sounds a lot like essence and existentialism, and what ought to be is what really is the essence, but no, what is really the essence. It's just like, I don't know. It's messy for me. I don't know if anybody wants to go in this route, but I'm really confused, and I would like to have some clarity. And I know confusion is good, but I was wondering if this really maps onto what we're talking about, or am I just in my own little weird world? I'll leave it open to see what people think.
Thank you, Ari. Well, there's first of all, everything that you're asking about reinforces the problem, the core problem, which is as moderns, we're trying to philosophize, but modernity is an anti-philosophical epoch with an anti-philosophical worldview. And it makes it very hard to talk clearly about what philosophy is or what different kinds of philosophy are, because everything has been defined as its opposite or something flattened from it or a caricature of it. So, analytical philosophy are people who call themselves analytical philosophers actually analytical philosophers? Are people who call themselves existentialist philosophers actually existentialist philosophers? What is the real thing and what is just the brand or the posture or the label? These are really hard things to separate from each other. I mean, Kenneth doesn't think Sartre is an existentialist. He thinks Sartre is somebody who calls himself an existentialist, but then isn't. Right? And so if the analytical philosophers call themselves analytical philosophers, does that mean they actually are analytical philosophers? Is analytical philosophy a clear position or statement of position, or is it just a working method that anybody could be an analytical philosopher if they adopted its methods? The question area that you're exploring is the reason you're confused is because it's confusing. It's fraught with confusion. And even the word essence in what you were saying, you use the word essence in two completely opposite ways without noticing that you did it. And that's because the philosophers that we're trying to discuss and refer to themselves use the word essence in completely opposite ways. And so if we're trying to say, well, how do you relate analytical philosophy to existentialist philosophy? You're dealing with two entirely different systems of vocabulary, many of which use the same words to mean opposite or orthogonal things. It is inherently confusing. The stuff's it's the human mind. Remember 7 ± 2 things? And now imagine 700 loaded vocabulary terms, all of which have at least two completely different sets of meanings. And if we're talking modernity versus medieval versus ancient, then that's at least three different perspectives on what those words could mean. And to compare and contrast these things, we have to hold them all in our head at the same time when we just don't have room in our head for all these things. It's a problem. The things that you're asking about, what are these things and what are their relationships to each other? It's a problem. So one of the things that Kenneth typically does is he says, by existentialist, he means he wants to talk about the thing itself, not because the thing itself is good, not because is equals ought. He says that's not an existentialist position. But because if you don't know what something is, you're in no position to figure out whether something's good or bad. You could be getting really emotionally upset or intellectually invested in something that has no reality at all. And you don't know because you don't know what is. He says, it's not that what is tells you what ought to be, but that you can't figure out what ought to be if you don't have a realistic frame of reference. One way of expressing this, and this was one of the things I wanted to talk about this week, and I'm not going to get into it yet because Donald's hand is up and I want to call on Donald in a sec, but I'm just going to allude to it, is this question of the benausos, the form of Homo sapiens that is invested in Verstand, in intellectualism, in systematic thinking, mathematics, logic, verbalisms, a lot of the things analytical philosophy prides itself on. That stuff, but it's also the things that stockbrokers and accountants and lawyers make their careers out of: abstractions, systems, systematization, algorithmic thinking, all of this stuff. We've talked about what a curse it is when it runs the world, because it has abstracted itself from concrete reality. It's abstracted itself from the values. It's so concerned with meeting its numerical and theoretical goals that it's lost track of whether or not we're all going to live or die. It's like that. Things like, did we pollute all of the fresh water and now there's nothing to drink? There's no place for them on the spreadsheet. They're just, they're not even part of the calculation. They're adrift, right? This problem with Benauseia, one of the legitimate questions is, would this be such a problem if we were still living in the forest, hunting animals and collecting herbs? Or would it be an enormous gift? Because it could lead to systematically making sure you don't pick the poisonous mushroom. You pick the edible mushroom, to systematically distinguishing where is the clean water versus where is the polluted water. The analytical, systematizing, pattern matching thinking could be an enormous boon when the default context is a very naturalist context in which the need for survival is right in everybody's face. But that exact same set of virtues, when taken out of that context and placed into the context of the modern world, which as we talked about last week, Gilbert Murray says one of the main characteristics of the modern world is that people who really aren't fit to survive, who are basically not sane and don't have a clear picture of the world, are nevertheless able to live reasonably healthy lives. And the point of that statement is, that the context that previously would have gotten you killed if you were batshit crazy has changed to a context in which you can basically live a successful life or even become in charge of a nation while being batshit crazy. Because we're now so distanced that now I'm talking Phil stuff, right? We're outside of nature one and we're into nature two, the artificial pseudo nature that we've created. And in this context, all those feedback loops that used to exist to leash Verstand and noesis to reality on a minute by minute, day by day basis, to make sure that its powers were not being used to escape into a land of theory where everything makes sense but nothing's true, But instead, we're being used as a superpower to keep us from poisoning ourselves and making sure we can plan ahead for when is the time to plant the wheat so that we can harvest the wheat at the right time so that we can eat through the winter. It was a superpower in the right context. And now it's deadly in this escapist context. And so one of the things Kenneth talks about, and here he's rephrasing or reworking Nietzsche and some others, is philosophy itself is at its best when it's grappling with reality. And that's what an existentialist philosopher believes. Not that what's real is what's right, but that the ways that philosophical thinking can go wrong are hemmed in and ruled out when its focus is on reality as closely as possible. The more philosophy starts gazing into its own navel and becoming philosophy and about philosophers and about abstractions, the more the downsides of things that look like philosophical thinking increase, and the virtue starts to turn into a vice. It starts to drift out of philosophizing and into sophistry. Vague, wow, man, what if? What if the Aryan race is the best race, man? Oh, yeah, give me a hit of that stuff. We're not talking about specific people. We're not talking about broad generalizations about most of the people we've never met, thousands of years we never lived through. We're the arm waviness of it. When that's the food that you're feeding what otherwise might look like philosophical modes of thought, they degenerate into escapist, sophistic modes of thought. And this is kind of what Kenneth means by existentialism. That odd is a whole separate question, but is something that existentialists believe you have to be concerned with, because without that, all the other gifts of philosophy turn into vices. I've never heard Kenneth say it like this, but I've heard him say this in completely different Kennethian ways. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
It's just, Ari had me thinking, there's about Einstein and relativity, but maybe something is more like what Einstein thought about quantum mechanics, in that he kind of found them abstract, that because they offered no model of reality. What's the world doing when we're not looking at it? Is it even? And the quantum mechanics, at least generally said, look, we're the real existentialist. We have observers, measurements. These are real. These are existential. We don't have to explain anything. Our numbers work. They're always right. They're the most mathematically correct theory in the history of physics. They work. Your idea of some, of general relativity that tries to be this all-encompassing, that's the abstraction. That's not the existential. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know where this leads, but it led to, I think, both camps being able to argue in some real sense, about what is it to be existential. One, we don't have to offer a theory. Our measurements, we have observers, measurements, produce a result. We have a set of formulas that relate these results to each other. They always work. That's real. You're the one that has the system of partial differential equations that describe the cosmos for all time and its evolution. You're the abstract one. He says, no, I'm the real one, because I have a model of what the cosmos is and what it's doing and how it's interacting. And you don't. You have little pinpricks. You're the abstraction. So it's enjoyable, Ari. I would say that there are some increasingly physicists, philosophers of science, and whatnot who are trying to rethink the whole origin of both theories to understand if there were logical mistakes, methodological mistakes, whatever. Do we break the impasse? But I don't know if it will happen. It would be nice for me. I would like to see it happen, but
I
maybe
want, I want,
not.
I want to say something really fast, very short, in response to this is really interesting, I think, is the Einstein claim is very abstract. Clearly, he's making a model, but he's claiming my model allows me to have meaning. I think they're making
Exactly.
existentialism is about meaning, and they're saying we get to meaning through like so. It's interesting. Einstein's saying I'm his existentialist because I believe in meaning, and you can only have meaning with a model. You have to have a model. That's his claim. You can't have anything. I don't care what your information is. If you don't have a model, everything's noise. There's no signal. And the other guys are saying, well, if you don't, at least we have real noise. The noise we're looking at, this is real. Your stuff is made up. At least this is real. We don't have to, like, I love it. We don't have to make a model. We don't have to explain anything. But the problem is if you don't explain anything, I don't understand how you can get to meaning. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong, because a lot of times people just sit in the woods for years and they feel meaning, right? So I mean, something like this, you can arrive at meaning at multiple ways, and you don't have to do, I don't know, maybe you do have to go to Einstein's route to some degree to get meaning, and maybe you don't, and maybe you could just be like, here's all my little blips, here's my facts. I don't know what they mean. I don't have any models, but it's reality. I'm an existentialist. Like, that's my meaning. Maybe that is meaning. The no meaning is a meaning. I mean, it's weird. But anyways, I feel like they're both trying to ask about meaning, and they're saying my method for meaning. But I feel like the target is the same. They're still trying to get to meaning. They have these different approaches, and they're claiming meaning is what is valuable. I could be wrong, but that's what it sounds like. Anyways, I like this.
You
Yeah.
just woke me up, Ari. Thank you.
Yeah, it's ultimately the you see that some of these the ancient Greek perspective on this is that what we're talking about here is an argument between two faculties of the mind about which one is the right one and the only one that you need. And the ancient Greek position is it's not true that either of them is the only one that you need. Each of them has its strengths and weaknesses. This is what Hegel argues, right? So gnosis, the live wire immersion in experience, has a truth to it because it is as concrete as it's possible to get. You are in the moment. In Empire Strikes Back, Yoda is always yelling at Luke Skywalker because ever his mind is somewhere else, never on what he's doing and where he is. And that's why he fails at all these things he tries to do in the here and now, because he's busy dreaming about the someday and somewhere. Right? This is Yoda. Yoda's arguing for gnosis. He says you have to be immersed in reality in the flow of experience, or you're going to miss some of the information in that flow. And when you miss that information, it might be the tiger that's now going to eat you because you weren't paying attention, right? So the live wire flow of direct experience, there's no guarantee that it's absolutely true, but what it does have going for it is that it's immediate and it is connected to reality. But conversely, because it's so parochial, you get all these problems like being surprised every day when the sun rises. Oh my God, what is this brilliant thing? Who could have imagined this? Well, you need to start developing the pattern detecting part of your brain, the other part of your brain, the noesis that looks ahead and says, this has happened before. I think it's going to happen again. Furthermore, I think I can learn how to measure the intervals between when it happens and predict when it'll happen again. I can make a model. And this is where you start to get into the superpower of noesis is modeling the concrete reality. But the Achilles heel of noesis is confusing the model for the reality and letting go of the flow of experience and just moving into and trying to inhabit the realm of theory in which everything always comes out the way we theorize that it does. So making a model, this is where I'm going to wrap this up before I call on Sharon because I don't want to lose what she's talking about. But I've said before, and I'll say it again, Kenneth talks about this, Nietzsche and Hegel and Heraclitus talk about this. The solid ground of the cosmos is not propositions, but paradoxes. What holds you up is never things that are absolutely true, as distinguished from things that are absolutely false. It's never things that are completely internally consistent and coherent, as opposed to things that are incoherent and inconsistent. Instead, you know that you're getting to the ground of reality when you've reached unresolvable paradoxes. So, to make a model of a real thing is a form of honoring that real thing, for honoring its reality, not letting yourself be so lost in the flow of experience that you fail to notice the pattern, which is equally real, right? That the sun is coming up tomorrow is equally real to whatever you're immersed in at this particular moment. They're both true. But to the radical gnostic, in its naive form, only the immediate moment is truth. Live each day as though it's your last, right? That's like gnosis turned up to infinity. So the noesis is capturing something when it's done right, when it's tethered to reality. It's capturing something that is equally real, which is the past and the future, which are as real as the present. Right? The past, Utah Phillips used to like to say, the past didn't go anywhere. We all pretend it's in the past. It's not in the past. It's right here, right now. It's our perception of time that makes it seem less real than the immediate moment. And the power of noesis is the power to step out of the addiction to the current moment and look wider and see, oh my God, there was a yesterday and there's going to be a tomorrow. They're just as real. And likewise, my parochial live wire experience of life is different from Geneva's live wire parochial experience of life. She sees things I'm never going to see, and vice versa, because she's living her life when and where she is, and I'm living my life when and where I am, and we've never even met physically, right? So each of us has access to different things that really happened. But if I'm completely obedient to extreme forms of gnosis, I'm going to treat Geneva like she's not quite real. Like it's all about me. I'm the hero and she's just one of my NPCs, a supporting character who's here to validate my story as either a supporter or an antagonist, which is utterly false. But it's an illusion, a compelling illusion that gnosis creates. They talk about how in the development of an infant, there are early stages when the infant finally comes to realize that their parents exist and aren't just a bunch of colors and sounds undifferentiated from the mass of confusing things that are happening when you're a newborn. They come to see that your parents are actually there, but they think their parents are extensions of themselves, like their hands and their feet. It's a stage in development because after all, I cry and the bottle comes. I cry and I get burped. I cry and my diaper gets changed. Obviously, they're part of me. And it takes a while to get to the next, to be able to dislodge that gnosic delusion and move into the more noetic realization that yes, they're real, but they're real as separate people, not as me or as part of me. Noesis contributes an enormous amount of our capacity to appreciate reality. And so long as it's tethered to that reality, it remains a gift. But if you cut the tether and start to get the rush of ideas and go, 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 think, right, 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 then you start to become crazy, right? In Hollywood shows, when they're showing the schizophrenic, the paranoid schizophrenic, and he's got the big board on the wall, and he's got all the pins and the maps and the images and all the pieces of string from one to the other, and he's showing you all the connections, and he won't stop talking. He's all revved up, and they're like, "This man needs a tranquilizer." Right? That's noesis. He's trapped. He's gone completely into the realm of theory. And it's not that it's all false, right? Like they say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. He might be onto something here. But man, is he detached from his concrete reality. He hasn't taken a shower in 4 days. And the concrete reality is he smells bad. He should have noticed that. He should have taken a shower. But no, he's up there drawing his notes and making his string and sticking in his pins. He's gone to noesis. So the ancient Greek and Hegelian and Kenneth Smithian position is neither to gnosis nor to noesis should you give mastery over yourself. Each of them is a powerful but half-witted approach to life. And when people try to turn one of them into a pure, perfect philosophy, it's a disaster. It has its strengths, but oh my God, does it have its weaknesses? And the only possible mature approach to life is to not let either one of them be the master, but to put them into a dialectical relationship where they serve you. Each of them brings to you what it thinks is true, and you know that about half of what it thinks is true might be true, but about half is completely false. And the only way you're going to figure out which is to pit them against each other because they have opposite strengths and weaknesses. Make them criticize each other. Don't let either one of them be in charge. You need your Spock, but you need your McCoy. Otherwise, you're never going to be Captain Kirk, which is the whole point of that set of three characters. So if this is the framework that Kenneth Smith is operating on, the question becomes, what do things like analytic philosophy have to say about that? And the answer is mostly they don't. That's not their frame of reference. They would never express any of it this way. And thus we're sort of talking past each other. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind. Sorry to take so long.
Wants me to do that, then I want to unmute. Well, my question is pretty simple. I heard Donald talk about meaning, and I thought that meaning is either subjective or objective, right? And then I want to take us back to where we got started, existentialism and or escapism. And so my question is, and we're talking about fideism, faith. In which of those entities does it operate as a noun or a verb? That's my question. I don't know if that's if it makes sense, but it seems like it's a puzzle to me.
Yes. Yes. It certainly is. I mean, this is that issue again. What faith meant to a medieval is totally different from what faith means to a modern, which is totally different from what faith would have meant to somebody like Plato, whatever the Greek equivalent, whether it's pistis or something else. What are we talking about? And the answer in all three cases is each of these people, whether it's Augustine or Plato or Donald, when they say faith, they're saying something from a completely different worldview.
Exactly. To the indigenous people, when they're doing their dances for rain, they have faith that the rain will come, but they're not ascribed to any particular entity. So that's faith as a verb. Yes.
About that, let's look at that example. Tony Hillerman has written a series before he passed away, he wrote a whole series of detective novels set on the Navajo reservation involving Joe Leaphorn and Jim Chi. They're really quite good. And I learned a lot about Navajo culture from them. And when I finally went to go meet Navajos, they all said, "Oh yeah, we love his novels." And I was like, "Oh, did he get everything right about your culture?" They said, "No, but he points in the right direction." Said, "But you know what he did get absolutely right?" And I always remember this. They said, "If he says the dirt road that's 2.5 miles down Highway 666, you take the right turn. If he says that a quarter mile down that road there's a bunch of potholes that will knock out your transmission," says he's absolutely right. Says the Navajos are all like, "Yep, we hate that road." That is absolutely right. That is where those potholes are, and we're always worrying about our cars. So there's ways in which he gets the stuff dead right, and there's other ways in which he's arm waving and approximating. But one of the things he talks about, he's got a sequence where they're talking about the Hopi rain dance. That's why I bring it up. Is there's the Hopi and the Navajo have a love-hate relationship, and it has something to do with the fact that the Hopi used to have more territory before the Navajo moved in and took a bunch of it, but also that the Navajo incredibly respect the Hopi and see them as their elders and wiser. And the Hopi it's hard not to like that. It's like, okay, you put me on a pedestal. You took away the rest of my house, but you put me on a pedestal. So I kind of love hate. So he's got a couple of novels in which there are Hopi characters and Navajo characters interacting. And in at least one of them, there's a drought. And the Hopi are arranging to do the rain dance. And they talk about the philosophy, the Hopi philosophy. And as far as I can tell, Hillerman got this right. It's not as simple as if we do this dance, it will cause the rain to come. I've read plenty of Western anthropological. I used to be crazy for anthropology. I went through a phase. I thought I was going to be an anthropologist. I've read plenty of Western anthropological accounts of rain dances that say that it's magical thinking and they think that they can force the rain to come. But Hillerman's description of what the Hopis believe is different from that. He says, whether the rains come or not is up to nature and the spirits that govern nature. It's up to them whether the rain comes. It's not up to us. But what is up to us is whether we harmonize with that nature and with what those spirits expect of us. We have responsibilities. And this is kind of Jewish, right, Ari? I mean, very early Hebrew. There's some early Hebrew stuff here that there is a covenant, and that as the people who follow this covenant, we have to do the things that you have to do at the right times. And when there's a time of drought, there are things that the people, which is what Hopi means, that they're the people, that the people must do. And if the people don't do those things, then why should the spirits ever bring rain back? Now, if you do those things, it doesn't ensure or cause the rain to come back. It's still up to the spirits whether or not to bring the rain. But the spirits won't be pissed off at you, saying, what you don't want to do is compound a drought with bad behavior and piss off the spirits. That's the Hopi perspective. So when there's a drought, you do the right thing that you're supposed to do, so at least they're happy with you. And in doing the dance, two things happen. One is you do what you're supposed to do. The other is you remind yourself of who you are as a people. We are the people that stick together. In times of drought, we don't turn on each other. We all suffer together. We all recognize together that this is a hardship. We all bear this hardship together. And the way that we express that is through our time-honored traditions. By going back to our time-honored traditions, by re-evoking the ancient covenants that we have with nature and its spirits, we are also replacing ourselves back firmly within the framework of our identity as a people. And even if nothing else comes of it, even if the rain never comes, that's a good thing in itself. So we may be suffering, but we're stronger as a people. And as a stronger people, we can endure hardship more successfully.
So is that a noun or a verb?
Exactly. And in Hopi and Navajo, they're very verb-oriented languages. In Navajo, there are many sentences you can say that don't even have a noun. The things that we would think of as nouns are modifiers on the verbs. These gigantic, like German. Anyone who studied German knows you can make some very long words in German, and they're totally legitimate German words. Navajo and Hopi are the same way. You can make these gigantic words, except that in German the words are usually nouns, and in Navajo and Hopi they're usually verbs. To have faith, the focus in Navajo or Hopi would be the act of faithing or of having faith or investing your faith in something.
That's
Whereas
right.
in English is a noun-oriented language. So faith is a noun. You have it or you don't.
Because in the previous paragraph where Kenneth Smith talked about faith as somnambulistic, I think that's escapist. And a part of Christianity operates like that. And that's a noun.
Yes.
And so I'm looking at this faith entity from different perspectives and see how it fits into either existentialism or escapism.
Yes. And it's like objective and subjective. When we try to pin down whether something's one or the other, it often turns out to be at one level one of them, but at a deeper level the other one. So many people who call themselves objective are actually wildly subjective. They're escapists. They live in the land of theory, and one of the things that's true about the land of theory is that they're always right. And because they think they're always right, they think that makes them objective and you subjective because you're wrong, because they think objective is truth and subjective is falsehood. This is how the words get used in English. And so when someone says, "Oh, don't be so subjective," what they mean is, "I'm right and you're wrong. I'm a winner and you're a loser." I'm scientific and objective, and you're just superstitious and irrational. And frequently they mean I'm a man and you're a woman, or I'm being manly and you're being womanish. Because right, it doesn't English imply after thousands of years of evolution or whatever the hell has happened to it, isn't it always implying that men are cool-headed and rational and women are all emotional and so the whole that what the men do is the good thing and it's right and what the women do is the bad thing and it's wrong, objective versus subjective. It's baked right in there, right? It's into the structure of our society. And it's nothing to do with what's real or what's important. Because, as Hegel and Kenneth and the Greeks would say, both your gnosis and your noesis are important sources of truth. And anyone who clings to one and points and laughs at the other is an idiot, right? We evolved emotions because they have actual objective survival power. I mean, immense survival power. And the clearest evidence of that, I mean, I've collected a lot of evidence of this over the years about the objective importance of the subjective side. But the clearest evidence of that is police will tell you, and FBI people will tell you, psychopaths who intend to kill and eat you, even if they're just going to kill you, frequently can pass really well for normal. It's frequently hard to tell that somebody's gone completely batshit crazy in that way. But the one common characteristic is the creeps. So that a significant number of people have survived close encounters with psychopaths because their skin crawled. And they said, I mean, he's doing all the right things, but something feels off. So I'm not going to go home with this charming guy. And then that'll be the night that he picked up somebody else and killed them instead. And that woman, she lived because of her subjective, irrational, haha, womanish feelings, which saved her fucking life. And all the guys who point and laugh and say feelings are stupid are the ones who, under other circumstances, will be killed and eaten by the psychopath because they will disregard their feelings as being, oh, the stupid subjective stuff. That doesn't matter. Ah, now I'm dead. Well, if that doesn't matter, your survival doesn't matter. And you could see how emotions are tapping into intuition, which is tapping into perception through channels that you don't have time to think through at the time to try to suggest that the sound in the forest, something's wrong right now. And you might not have time to realize that what's wrong is there's no birds singing and there's no mammals calling, and it's because there's a tiger in the bush. And all the other animals have figured it out, and you're the last one to clue in. And if you pay attention to that feeling of the creeps and get the hell out of there, you live. Emotions are really important. They're powerful, not as a ruler, not as a master or a governor, but as a source of information that is often far more efficient at getting to the point. So Sharon, you asked about subjective, objective. That's the problem is which one's more real than the other? And the answer is each of them is real. They're real in different ways about different things. They have different strengths and different weaknesses. And it's the same with this stuff about existentialism. Or another one I like is transcendentalism versus immanentalism. Does meaning come from the outside and we impose it on things, or are things meaningful in and of themselves and they're waiting for us to discover it? And again, it resolves into paradoxes. I can hear Heraclitus dancing from beyond the grave. It's like, yes, yes, paradoxes. This is what I'm talking about. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, your point about no psychopaths, I think it gets a bit overdone, but yeah, it's about for me, meeting certain types of women. And there's a mental picture that's warning me. But there's this little thing that this image, sort of Jungian, sort of imagery. It's, gee, this person reminds me of the last one I met, but you discount it. I was going to say I was in the Austin group, and they're doing Simone de Beauvoir. And yeah, you got Sartre there, but yeah, what Ken have said about them, or said about Sartre, is getting to be more and more my observation that you listen to de Beauvoir talk about, authentic sex, and it's the biggest load of rationalisms out there. It doesn't deal with facts. It's trying to impose a culture, which is fine. That's your culture. Go with it. But she's trying to say that her newly discovered culture is the rule for everybody. She's found the truth in regards to what is authentic sex. That's amazingly, yeah, it's sort of misleading yourself enormously. And I got the feeling with Sartre that he was sort of like, he's the shock jock who's selling existentialism. It had been invented a long time before him. He was smart enough to put it together and really grab the term, which had already existed, and shove it in everybody's faces. But it goes back to Kierkegaard and Schelling. Now the other one where you're saying this is where the problem is, where you used Geneva as an example and said, well, I sort of might treat the other person as unreal. That's not so much the problem. The problem is, I get the feeling, mistaking oneself as the reality. If you put yourself under the same microscope you put other people under, you find you don't pass the reality test either. Yes, but that became very much this is the thing that always annoyed me about Sartre. That it's he's engaging in a type of rationalism and calling it existentialism. Now, Schelling was the one that came up with the warning that invariably you're going to be trying to impose rationalisms on the world. The trick is that, they're always going to fall short. Just remembering that's the important point. His 1840 lectures were all about opposing Hegel's absolute idealism. Now, absolute idealism is what brought us the Nazis and brought us Soviet Russia. We have the absolute answer. We're right, you're wrong. But you have to turn it around and say, well, am I really right all the time? Do I have the answer? Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, that's a real Kennethism right there, isn't it? It's all well and good to use our powers of thinking and debate to tear down other people's arguments, but we don't become a philosopher until we turn them against ourselves and go, wow, a lot of what I think turns out to be bullshit. I had no idea how much garbage there was in here. It's like now I'm doing something philosophical. Before that I was just engaging in debate and sophistry. And it's weird. You would think that you'd want a culture to cultivate an appetite for that, Like we have to work to cultivate an appetite for vegetables in little kids. Not everything should be candy or even fruit. Some things should be vegetables. They contribute, and they you might not like broccoli at first, but we got to figure out how to hook you on that flavor, or at least some of the crucifers, because you need that good sulforaphane in your body. But so we learn to do that, but somehow we don't think it's a good idea to cultivate in our children an appetite for debating themselves and their own ideas. We teach them to debate other people's ideas and see how other people are wrong, but we don't teach them the far more important skill of learning to question the things that they believe. And frequently it's because the parents want to clone, they want to clone. They have the fantasy that they can just churn out a little themselves as a form of immortality. And the last thing in the world they want is their kids seriously questioning the core belief system of the parents. But that's what the child needs to do to become an adult. It's not that they have to overthrow those beliefs, but they at least need to get down into the roots of them and find out, does this hold together? Is this legit? If they've never really questioned it, then they don't really understand themselves or their beliefs. But but we don't teach them that to cultivate that taste. And so you get all these people running around who think they're smart, and by that they mean that they can beat other people in arguments. But but it's not very smart to never question yourself. That's like the height of foolishness, and we don't teach them that flaw. I wish we would. Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I have two things. One about this you were just talking about, but also the Hopi thing way back a bit about the rain dance, but not quite in the way you maybe we expect me to mention that. But I wanted to say real fast about, yeah, this cultivating or embrace of ignorance. Like Yuval Harari talks about, that's like how the West and did science because they didn't marry knowing everything to their imperial authority, right? Like in the East, if they didn't know anything, they would be right. They would look weak. So here, if you don't know things, now it's an opportunity to get a lot of power that you didn't have. So, but no, for the Hopi is a really interesting thing that I like. Is what essentially what a rain dance I think is doing from, let's say I'm pretending to be an alien. It's obviously not a very good thought experiment here, but I'm trying to get outside of the human experience. And you look, what's the real value of something like a rain dance? And I also like to look at it from, let's say, my religion, but really, my religion is the only thing I have that can look really ancient. So I just want to look at ancient things, and mine's the only one that's the easiest to look at. So it's not that I like it better; it's just that I'm used to it, right? So, but mine says all this stuff about rain too. Like we even have like this time of year, like literally in the synagogue, there's a thing where this time of year there's like a change, and it's like really weird and all ceremonial. I mean, it's like pomp and circumstance, and we're praying for dew now. And so you're like, okay, we're praying for dew. Like what? Okay, and the point is, at least when it's like I imagine it like this: if I'm an alien, and if you got these ants, you know, they're and they get together and they do this dance every time they seem like they're running low on water, right? They got or something like that. You can figure it out like, oh, they're doing something. You don't notice, but on the inside, we say like, here, oh, they're doing a rain dance, and the aliens are like, what are they doing? And then somebody kind of figures out, or at least the way I see it, it looks like to me that when there's this kind of existential angst or threat to the herd, essentially you're going to have a risk of dissolving, or like your toothpaste. I like the toothpaste analogy here, but I actually thought about it less about a toothpaste, but more that you're a non-Newtonian liquid, and essentially if you get too individualized like we are in our society, that turns into gas and you're no longer cohesive, and now you can't do anything like a liquid can, right? Similarly, if you get too brittle, you get to leave the top of the toothpaste open overnight, you can't get any toothpaste out, right? You got all brittle, so you can't do anything. So I feel like these are the two extremes. On one end, if you have a herd that's everybody's a slave, like the way Nietzsche talks about it, then you're so brittle that you can't adapt to anything, and you're a solid. You become ice, right? You just crystallize. On the other hand, if you got so excited individually that you break up, you don't have water, you have steam, right? So the idea is water is only really useful apparently when you get that nice juicy surface tension that you can make you that capillary action, right? So that's if that's what we're after, right? So then the case is, you know, like, okay, what are they really doing with the rain dance? They're attempting to not either turn into a solid or a gas, and they want to remain liquids. It's a fancy way of saying this is a coordination. This is a way for them, the aliens, to be like, oh, there's some, you know, situation going on. They're mobilizing for war of some sort. They're organizing, and that essential organizing, from a neuroscience point, is really cool because especially with a dance is related to your what are called the here and now molecules that I talked about earlier. The is where you experience reality. You're in this I that. It brings more into an I thou attention state where you're interested in interacting with others. And it also, that I thou state, when you're really dancing in nature, is all about feeling safe and connected. That's going to be a big sort of panacea to the fear that water's not coming, right? So if you have all these people freaking out, it actually makes like a good solution to be like, oh, let's just everybody get up and dance together, and that'll help them relax and then feel like they're still a part of this tribe, and they don't have to freak out that they need to break away from the tribe and go look for water elsewhere, right? Something like that, or kill a bunch of people because there's not enough water for everybody, right? So it's sort of something like a coordination solution, I would imagine. That's how I like to look at it. Okay, that's good.
That's great, Ari. Thank you. So now we've got both Joe and Ari. We can talk about the things that were pending from last week.
Can I just say one thing here?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just want to drop this in very quickly. Because I think in the rain dance and with very primitive faiths, hope is a critical part of it, right? And that is the biblical definition of faith, which is the assurance and conviction of things hoped for and not seen. And that's the rain dance. And that's where you have to give it time. So that's why I asked under what conditions in those two things we're talking about, is it a noun and is it a verb?
Yes. And
Yes.
it's, you know, uh, related to this is the idea of prayer. Are we praying like to a Santa Claus because we want him to give us goodies? For many people, that's exactly how they pray. That's what they want. But more sophisticated prayers, people who pray, are praying the other way around. They're praying to make to recognize what their desire is, but not to force it. They're praying for wisdom and insight and to know they might express it as to know God's will, but that's like the Hopi thing of we want to harmonize with what actually has to be, but we need to understand what has to be, and we don't understand yet. We have these longings in us, and we're trying to reconcile that with whatever's actually happening. And the prayer creates this space to become bigger than oneself, to dilate one's soul and accept possibilities that might not have been on the short list of what we wanted, but maybe that's what has to happen anyway. And prayer then can be that act of cultivating one's own character in a sacred way. And I've read a lot about people who for whom faith is that kind of a thing. Go ahead, Sharon.
Well, prayer changes perspective, and the perspective is yours.
Right.
The prayer, the person doing the praying, right? And
Right.
it changes that perspective, and hope becomes a critical element instead of the wanting and the longing. And I don't know how to discuss this in philosophical terms, but this
You
is
just
just what
did.
I understand.
You just did. That was philosophical terms right there. And it gets to the heart of the problem, right? Because praying for goodies is the exact opposite of what you just described.
Correct.
But in English, it's the same word. God damn it. Why,
But it's
Yeah.
why do we call both of these things?
Sharon, that was fantastic. You also, using those language, the words you just used, actually have a lot of claims neuroscience wise, like trust means like positive prediction loop in the future. This is the opposite of depression and anxiety. All these things have real physiological, like, what do
They
we call
do.
it? Scientific, mechanistic claims that you're describing. And from my perspective, what I just heard, they were incredibly like aligned, very well, very accurate. They worked very well. Like hope is that. So don't undersell yourself. That was very nice.
It was well put. It was well put, Sharon. Yeah. And it's
still a doctor. That's all I know.
it's the heart of the whole discussion today, right? Because we use the same damn word to mean both things, even though the two things are opposites of each other. One of them is like a food for the soul, for character, for making us healthier and better people. And the other one's like a poison for the soul and the character. And it's a kind of egotism. And we use the exact same word that means both. It's as though I have to thank my lucky stars that English hasn't done that with the words food and poison, because it would be exactly like modern English to get rid of the word poison and just say food means both things. Why would you make that distinction? Just whatever somebody offers you, put it in your mouth. Don't ask questions. It's like, no, we have to make these distinctions. We have to distinguish between the prayer that ennobles us and matures us on the one hand versus the prayer that infantilizes us and makes us little ego monsters. They're two different things. They really shouldn't have the same word. And it's the same with faith. The question you asked,
Yes.
is it a verb or a noun? The answer is, wow, it really matters. These distinctions are incredibly important, and yet English won't give us the tools to do it.
And that's why I have difficulty with Kenneth's description about the somnambulist.
Yes.
Well,
So
like is upstream, I'll say, is life a noun or a verb? Right?
right, right. Yeah. In Navajo and Hopi, it's a verb. It's something you do. It's definitely not something you have. Yeah. So so when he's talking about somnambulism, the way to think about it is he's not talking about faith per se. He's talking about fideism. And fideism is the belief that religion is nothing more than faith, and that the kind of faith that it is not the kind of faith that ennobles us, but the kind of faith where we just will something to be true. and that's what religion is. That's fideism in the way that he's using it. And the other kind of faith, the ennobling faith, doesn't have this problem. And the ennobling prayer doesn't have this problem. That's not what he's criticizing. And in making this distinction, which I'm trying to make clearer than Kenneth does in this chapter, but I know it's what Kenneth means. In making this distinction, where I'm trying to be true to Kenneth is that the way that he distinguishes Jesus from, say, a medieval pope like Innocent III, and says Innocent III would call himself a Christian and claim that he represents all of what Christianity is, and everybody better obey him or else. Right, Innocent III, if you look him up, he did some stuff, man. So he did some stuff Jesus would not have approved of at all, and he did it in Jesus's name, which Jesus also would not have approved of at all. And so we're trying to talk about this dialectic of the medieval epoch, in which there is this tug of war for the soul of Christianity and the soul of Europe and the soul of medieval civilization. And the tug of war is, on the one hand, between the kind of movement that Jesus tried to start, that is about radical transformation of your character and about creating the blessed community in which we care for one another. Even if the powers that be around us, even if the social conventions don't reward us for doing it, even if they punish us for doing it, we're going to do it anyway. We're still going to. Oh yes, Angelina, good point. We're still going to focus on trying to do the right thing, on trying to be better people, and trying to take care of each other. But on the other hand, you had this empire that got stood up in his name that was about genocide, specifically about genocide, dedicated to genocide. We are going to eliminate all religions except ours. And not content with that, we're going to eliminate every variant of our religion that isn't our specific flavor of Christianity. And only that's allowed, and everybody else either converts or dies. And we are dedicated to this promise, and we believe the entire fate of the world depends upon our success in committing this genocide. That group also had words like faith and spirit and prayer, but they didn't mean them the way that Jesus and the desert mothers and fathers meant it. They meant it in this other way. You know, pray to obey the powers that be. Pray to do what the emperor tells you. Pray to do what the pope tells you. Pray to do what your king tells you. What your priest tells you. You're at the bottom and we're not at the top. God is above us, but we'll tell you what God wants. Don't worry your pretty little head about that. And obey. Like you raised this, Sharon, when we very first did the first sentence of chapter 5, when we first got into the medieval section. What is this religion that's specifically being critiqued? Is it authentic religion, or is it just a tool for empire and obedience? And our problem in the medieval epoch is that it's a tug of war between the two. And they're
Mhm.
both fighting over who gets to say what Christianity is, who gets to say what prayer is. It's tricky.
In the medieval times, I see religion as a tool of political control. And every time I go to Europe and I see all these churches with these stained glass windows, because the majority of the population then was largely illiterate, that's control. As beautiful as it looks, that's control. And there's a series on PBS now called From Christ to Constantine. And you could see that in the evolution, it was all about controlling the masses, because even in the Christian diaspora, which at the time was Paul and James, and I think it was Peter, if I forget. Yes, it is Peter, because he did say, upon your church, upon you, I will build my church. Peter, you're my rock. You could, even though they had infighting among them because they emphasized different aspects of the gospel,
Right.
right? Paul, not being a disciple of Jesus, thought the crucifixion, the magical part of the crucifixion was him dying. He loved us so much that he died. While the others see it differently, they emphasize the resurrection. But what I'm saying here, that faith has different entities. And in the medieval time, it was all about political control. In modern times, it's louder disparaged, but I think for really practicing Christians, and I'm speaking for myself, it's a partnership to get you through this life. It's a tool.
Mm-hmm. In the medieval period, it's a tug of war. Half of it is about political control. That's the half that has the armies and the money and the castles. For them, it's about political control. But the other half is equally important, even though Kenneth's not focusing on it in this chapter. The other half is the people who said, I think this is a betrayal of Jesus's message, and I'm going to go find myself a little hermitage out on a little island off of Scotland and live by myself simply and think about how to be a decent human being. And I'm going to, copy Psalms and Proverbs and scriptures and make sure that the idea of living a life for love and brotherhood is not forgotten and that it survives this period. Is there was an enormous amount of energy invested in that half of Christianity in the Middle Ages. We don't talk about it anymore because for us, the Middle Ages are our whipping boy. They're the bad thing that we're not. We're so good because we're not them, and so we can't acknowledge the things that they did right. And so we only talk about, we talk about crusades and inquisitions and so on. But what we never talk about is there were people genuinely inspired by the other part of Christianity, the real part. And those people did in their times amazing things. The people who would endanger themselves to live among the lepers and care for them, to try to make them more comfortable and to make sure that they know that they were loved. That doesn't fit anywhere within the framework of the religious empire. That's the other half of the dialectic. And it's what makes the religion so interesting.
Yes.
The struggle back and forth. Which faith, which prayer, which Christianity.
That's all of life, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Sharon. Joe, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, just one of the things that I'm actually interested in is this idea, even of how, even in thinking in terms of prayer, it actually this is something for Ari, and actually thinking about the word hevel and the idea of how that you were talking the distinction between noun and a verb, what that means essentially in Ecclesiastes, and how that would be interpreted through the frame of the way you were talking about noun and verbs.
Wait, which word? Which word? I missed that.
Hevel.
Oh, I could go on that. Rabbi Sachs has a whole book on that. It doesn't mean what you think it means. Everybody gets it wrong.
Well, that's what
we talked about this before. We
talked about his interpretation of it, but I'm thinking about it within the terms of because his interpretation is not traditional. So it's more or less like I was thinking about it within terms of the way you were talking about noun and verb.
Such a good question. I don't know if he thinks about it as traditional. He seems to claim.
No, he doesn't. He has a different take on it from what I remember.
What he's going to claim is more like the type of claim is that he's taking an ancient claim where dinosaurs were really dinosaurs, and now we just use them to mean political parties that are too old.
Correct.
Right. So he's trying to make the claim that he's making the original claim, and I don't know how valid it is because I'll be honest, in all the other Jewish rabbis that I've studied a lot, nobody uses this explicit language. Everybody just goes with the English that it is, that it's feudal or something. But the word in Hebrew etymology is related to breath, and it means a shallow breath. And so the shallow breath here is meant to be that life is fleeting and it's just a shallow breath. Is this idea of you put it in that poetry that life is meaningless because it's just a shallow breath, then that's where that's the angle of approach he's trying to mean on what it means. And that's this idea that as an individual, I have a shallow breath. But if I connect to God, or maybe in a more, I don't know, modern way that I think is reasonable, is if I connect to a larger organism called society, and society never dies, it's as if I never die.
Correct.
Right? So this is another form of the Greek immortality of courage, right? I will be, because courage is, remember, my act of courage. So this kind of way of mental gymnastics to get to immortality. But if it's like, if immortality is like, can be more than just my body, then maybe I could be a part of this group. And if there's, it's like, I like the analogy for me that works really easy. It's hard to explain, but it's like a cell in my body. If my cell in my body figures out it's part of me and it dies, it's like, I never die. I'm part of the whole body. That body lives for 100 years. I only live for I'm a toenail. I got clipped this week, right? But I was a part of the whole body, right? So that's when it feels like it's part of the whole body, it lives forever. But if it feels like it's a toenail, it just got clipped, right? So to me, maybe that's semantics, but identity actually works. in this, if you feel like you're a toenail, then it's Hevel. But if you are a part of the kingdom of heaven, whatever that means, then I'm a part of this infinite being that never dies, and I also have a place in the world to come. This is the biggest part that Judaism can't lie about. Whether you believe it or not, it's one of the tenet beliefs that there is some sort of future, and I get to be a part of it, and my essence that is now, again, whatever that means, like my soul or my experience will be retained, and it will be there in the future, and it will be as if it is now. Yet at the same time, the paradox is it will be nothing like I've ever experienced before. It will be nothing like myself. I will be nothing. Everything that I experience will be nothing predictable, and everything that I thought I was, yet it will be still somehow make sense with what I am now. It's unexplainable now, but it's totally a wonderful magical idea, a paradox, that there is a future, and it belongs to you, and you will be you, but you will also not be you, and the future will be totally different than you could possibly imagine, but it's worthwhile pursuing, so go do stuff now so that future comes and you can build it and eventually get to live in it in some sort of whatever way. But the point is the focus on the building it now.
But that's the interesting point, is that then you're really highlighting the relationship between the noun and the verb, right? Because then that is where the connection kind of comes in, right? So the verb is the act of participation, right? And the participation
yeah
yourself.
the building
and so that this is what it means, like, and this is something where the verb even becomes like stepping into the light, if you will, and ideas like that start to become something else in other types of forms of Christianity. So I mean, and you start to say, what does that really mean to step into the light, right?
Yeah.
And so then,
well, that's like the word journey. All I hear is the word journey. Journey is a noun, but it's totally not a noun.
One is just the act, right? And then the other is the actual one is just
process.
Like one is the existence, one is taking an action. Like, so one is, if you were to say like Hevel, as far as just the act of breathing itself, and then there's the act of connecting the breath. So the breath, there's the breath that's taken in, and like take a deep breath, and then there is the act of actually connecting. That's the way I'm in understanding it.
That's fantastic. That's really nice. I like that.
No, and I mean, I think that because this relates to kind of like, and I've talked to you about it too in the past, is the idea of, even though like the Philosopher's Stone, the idea of ascending, like the spirit, so to speak, that you're ascending up. So you have the physical, the internal, and then there's the action, right, which is the triangle, if you're to draw it out, which is actually interesting in and of itself, because then there's a subject verb object relationship.
Yeah.
See, and then there's elements of self-reference you can even get to from there. But anyway, I'm not going to go too far off track. But
that's the nature of paradox too.
That's exactly where paradox actually exists.
Right.
And I think, and that's where paradox, and there's a living word, like that's this idea that then it's constantly integrating something new. So yeah.
Very nice.
No, I appreciate that, because I think that was actually that was helpful for me, because I was thinking that this whole time. Anyway, and so that does change your orientation as to what does it really mean to be human, or where does meaning come from, and so this is where prayer comes in. What is your aim? What is your aim?
Yeah,
and so and then that's where you start to see meaning emerge from that.
Anyway. I wanted to ask, would you mind if I took I wanted to answer your question about Hevel with one more robust piece of support, which is
please do.
Where it first comes from. Usually also there's a biblical rule that if you see a word, you look to the first instantiation of it, and that's usually supposed to represent its most primary way of being or understood. And so the first time Hevel is actually the story of Cain and Abel, is Cain and Hevel.
Right.
And Cain means, so Hevel means a shallow breath, and Cain comes from the word kaniti, which is when Eve, Chava, names him. She said, "I have acquired for myself a son." And kaniti is literally an object relationship, not a subject. This is really interesting where you get there. This is, I said, I've made myself an object that I own, a little clone. Like we're not supposed to. It's warning against this. And the message, according to the rabbis, is supposed to be really childish. That when you think of your child as an object, it tends to lead to murder. It's like boom. It's like such a straight parable. And so the idea is that kaniti, Kayan, represents acquisition. Maybe things like capitalism, property. There's a lot of stories about him that like he set up shop, like he owned land, while Hevel actually roamed around and was more of a recognized that he doesn't own anything. So there's this idea that maybe Kayan already from the beginning is all about ownership and turning things into objects, and they get murder because of that. And I don't know, it's a nice way of saying it, but the point really from the beginning is if you want to understand Hevel, you have to understand it in the context of its original story. And the original story was being murdered by his brother named Kayan, which is the root of the word means acquisition or acquiring.
That's an interesting perspective because I got to tell you, I never thought about it. I mean, because I always think about it in terms of the subject-object relationship, with it oneself, right? However, the way you're talking about it, it's a subject-object relationship in an ethical sense.
Well,
Like
it's supposed to
you're talking
scale.
about the acquiring of something else. Like this is my treating somebody like an object. So
Well,
it's
that's
more
like
like an
the. Well, wait,
I
you're onto
it versus
something.
I thou. It's like an I it versus the I thou, if you were to put it in Buber terms. So that
Yeah,
would
but
that be
there's gold. There's gold that you're missing that you don't realize. It's so simple. Right before this is Adam and Eve. That's with self. That's just me, and I have no personal responsibility. The next story is about the responsibility you have to like your brother. It's not just about
right,
you.
right,
It's about him,
right.
right? And then later it's society. So the thing is, all of these things you're saying, they work at every scale. It's not one or the other. It's supposed to be how do you make them work at all the scales? That's a big mystery. How do you align all of these ecosystems at once? Like that's very difficult.
No, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. No, that's an interesting how the stories obviously they do build on one another within that context. So no, that's great.
Thank you both, gentlemen. This has been great. Sharon held up her printout of the chapter, and that's her shorthand way of saying, "How about the text? Can we go to Kenneth Smith's text today?" And yes, this was all the catching up with what we've been talking about, rounding up the dangling issues and taking us to the text. So if she's game, I'd like to take us to the text for our final hour because there's some good material here. And again, for those who I'm actually going to repost this that we posted earlier. Here's the link to the text. It's chapter 9, medieval faith understood as a vice, and it's about what happens when you use faith not as a part of your religion, but as it becomes the cult of the religion. It becomes the religion itself. Is about the wrestling match. Can I impose my will to believe strongly enough? And that's the focus that a religious empire has. They want you to have that faith in them. And if you don't have that faith in them, well, then it's the sword for you. This was the basis of Crusades. So we're talking about not the sum total of the medieval version of Christianity, but that half of the dialectic, the half that's about force. And we're in paragraph 5, and I'm just going to take us back quickly through the four sentences we've done so far in there because they flow together, right? And so, what are the implications of founding a religion on a cult of faith or fideism? And so this is we talked a couple of weeks ago about how this is Kenneth doing that thing we talked about when we started out today's session, drawing a distinction we're not used to making. What if faith and religion are two different things? What if they're not synonymous? What if faith could just be a part of a religion and not the center of the religion? That's almost unthinkable to medievals or to moderns. But it used to be normal. Normally faith was just an ingredient, not the sum total. And so he's doing that thing where he's trying to help us to break apart a closure that's happened in our minds, where there's an enormous realm of experience and reality and meaning that's invisible to us because two things that delimited that vast space have now conceptually been equated to each other, erasing the space that used to be between them. Faith and religion as two different things. Then the next sentence, without knowing or having to inform oneself, one assures oneself that one already knows all that is essential. And, I hear Stephen there. Every time I say the word essential now, I hear Stephen. Christian fideism is the degradation of Platonic a priorism into irrationalism, the evolutionarily or rationally retrograde collapse of philosophical culture into dogmatism. And when we talked about this sentence, we talked about how this represented the ancient Greek conception that you begin in begriff, in a naive form of gnosis that's all encompassing. To the infant, everything is absolute. The pain they feel is the biggest pain ever. When they're happy, it's the biggest happiness of anybody's ever felt because they have no life. They've only been around for 3 seconds. Everything is the biggest experience they've ever had. And it takes time to grow out of that first stage into the second stage of naive noesis or Verstand, where we over intellectualize, we distance ourselves from our appetites and emotions, and we take pride in our ability to separate ourselves from our drives and addictions and appetites. But the downside is we've also separated ourselves from our connection to reality. That live wire of gnosis, that's the flow of input from the real world that's trying to remind us when we've done the right thing and when we've done the wrong thing, when we've done something that makes us happy or when we've done something that makes us ashamed. That was all what we gave up to escape into the world of theory and logic and intellectualism, and it's a problem. And then we're supposed to grow out of that. We're supposed to see the problems with over intellectualizing, the way that now that we treat other people not as actual concrete people but as abstractions. Oh, look, it's a Jew, it's a black person, it's a white person, it's a conservative, it's a liberal. Now we aren't actually dealing intelligently with the real human being in front of us. We've erased the human being and replaced them with our theory, our properties, our abstract properties about them. And in doing so, as Hegel says, it is always an error. As important as Verstand is, without the ability to pattern match, who the hell would we even be as a species? It's so important to us. And yet, at the exact same time, to abstract is to be an error, says Hegel. The moving into the land of theory is moving into a land of errors. And most intellectuals never figure that out. But we're supposed to. Where Hegel says these are stages in the process of development of what for our species is supposed to be our arete. Like the cheetah is fast, like the salmon can smell all the way across the ocean the trail that leads back to the one stream it was born in, so that it can navigate its way across the deeps back to that one creek to spawn. Those are their gifts. Our gift is the capacity to develop this third stage of the mind, what Hegel calls Vernunft, which is the dialectical form, where we are neither ruled by our live wire experience of begriff, nor are we ruled by our abstracting, intellectualizing faculty of Verstand. We make them both servants. We harness them together into a dialectical relationship so they critique each other. We listen to them, but we don't trust them. And as a result, we create Vernunft, which is a new mode of thought. What Hegel says is the mature adult mode of thought. It's what we're supposed to develop into. And it's what the Greeks equate with aristeia, the eristic mind. That's what Hegel is calling Vernunft. It is the mind that is fit to govern. And it's fit to govern because it knows better than to trust its appetites, and it knows better than to trust its ideologies, which is the Greeks' way of saying nobody who's ruled by their appetites and nobody who's ruled by their ideologies has any business being in government. You can't trust them. Or rather, you can only trust them to do what it's in their nature to do, and what it's in their nature to do is not to treat other people well. They can't. They have to, they're either being too, and now I'm going to grossly oversimplify, they're either being too subjective or too objective, where being too subjective is actually a form of objectivity, and being too objective is also a form of subjectivity. They're either trapped in their theories or they're trapped in their experiences, and it doesn't give them the distance that's required to be skeptical about their own ideas, which is required to do good governance. To do good governance, you have to be acutely aware of your limitations, and you have to be acutely aware that other people's needs also matter. not just your needs, and that other people's ideas also matter, not just your ideas, and that reality is separate from both of these things, and that we're always fools in the dark in a process of exploration, trying to feel our way towards better answers than what we have now. That is Aristeia. That is Vernunft. That's the adult mind. And it's very difficult to accomplish. And what he's talking about in sentence two is the idea that if instead you say faith is not an enabler of this, but is a replacement for it, then minds that could have or should have achieved this a level of maturity, this capacity to govern, collapse down into dogmatism, in which things have to be true because I need them to be true. And that's now you've now devolved from a mature mind into an infantilized mind, one of the two forms of infantilization. And that's what he's alluding to in sentence two. He's saying what's happening by doing this is just, and by the way, this goes back to the earlier questions about what is existentialism. Without knowing or having to inform oneself about what is essential is the core of existentialism. Implicitly, Kenneth is answering the question. The core is to say, yeah, we reason, we think, we argue, we use logic, we use every tool at our disposal, but to a specific purpose. And the purpose is to re-find reality as a tether. And from that ground, we can try to figure out what the right thing to do might be. But as long as we're hovering, buried in subjective experience of Begriff, or buried in the alternate subjectivity of ideologies of Verstand, we don't have solid ground with which to figure out right from wrong, because we don't even know real from unreal. We could be incredibly afraid of something that's never going to happen. And we put all of the nation's resources towards protecting ourselves from that thing that's not going to happen. And meanwhile, we're depriving resources from the things that happen every goddamn day that we have to deal with, but we didn't deal with it because we were terrified of this other thing. Oh my God, the giant spiders are coming. Let's put all of our money towards fighting the giant spiders. Meanwhile, people just want some clean water and a roof over their house. And we're neglecting all that because of the giant spiders. This is what happens if you don't have your governance in the hands of Aristoi, according to the Greeks. And that's what's being critiqued in sentence two. He says, fideism, when faith becomes a master instead of a servant, it leads to this kind of collapse in our ability to maintain our existential bearing. And as a result, because we don't know where and when we are existentially, we end up making bad choices. We make fantastic escapist choices that would make perfect sense in the fantastic world that we're living in our head, but not the world we're actually living in reality. He then continues, it embraces as if it were the most complete virtue, the vice of somnambulism. This is what Sharon was quoting earlier, going through life in a dream state. And this is, as we talked about when we did this sentence before, this is key Heraclitus. Heraclitus is on the short list of the 24 writers and philosophers who's always at Kenneth's right hand. He's always thinking about him, like he thinks about Aristotle and Arendt and Hegel and the others. They're always at hand. And if you're reading Kenneth just literally in terms of what you think the words mean to you, you're probably missing most of it. But if you read it from the context of what would these 12 to 24 other writers have to say about this subject, and then you think to yourself, I bet that's what Kenneth meant by it, you're probably getting closer to the real Kenneth, because he's always thinking about these frames of reference. So somnambulism is the key concern of Heraclitus. Not everything is made out of fire, not you can't step in the same river twice, not expect the unexpected, not the things that people quote all the time, but literally from the opening of his scroll, he says the biggest problem that people face is the laws of nature, the logos, the meaning immanent in nature is around us all the time and is decisive about what matters and what doesn't. And yet, even though every moment of our lives we are in direct relationship to the logos, most people behave as though they don't even know there is a logos, as though they have no acquaintance with it at all. He says it's like they're asleep. They're so disregarding what's going on around and within them. It's as though they're asleep. Heraclitus, in his opening sentence, brings up the topic of sleepwalking. He doesn't say sleepwalking, but that's the only way to interpret it. He says they're going about their lives not as they actually are, not dealing with what's actually there, but dealing with the fantasy in their mind, living mentally in the fantasy in their life, being alive to something that's not actually there, and being dead to what really is there, like a rock unable to roll itself out of the rain. It is a kind of devolution to sleepwalk through life. Because when our capacities fully mature, people can be amazing. We can sense things that another animal can sense, but we can also think through consequences and possibilities that most other animals don't think about. And then we can figure out solutions to those problems that other animals would just have to suffer. We have the capacity not just to be a soul, but to be a spirit, to be active in the world and to make the world, remarkably better. But that only works if we're grounded existentially in the actual reality we're in. If our minds are off sleepwalking through life, then we're going to use those powers for evil. Those exact same powers that could be a super gift when they're grounded in reality can become a terror when they're in the hands of the Nazis or Stalin or Pol Pot, right? The capacity to change the world is only a blessing if we're actually grounded in what's going on, if we're treating people the way they actually are, and not in our weird nightmare fantasies about, Jewish conspiracies or all intellectuals are destroying the country. I mean, this is the stuff that leads us into nonsense. And Heraclitus hates it, and Kenneth hates it, and that's what he's bringing up there. He's saying fideism is dangerous that way. Not faith, but fideism. In the same way, he would say it's not true that noesis is evil. Intellectualism isn't evil. We need it. We just shouldn't be, it shouldn't be our master. And likewise, our feelings, our emotions, our appetites, they're not evil. We need them. These things evolved in us for a reason, these capacities. We need them, but we need them in a harmonizing way, not a they master us and we just do whatever they say, like we're slaves of them kind of way. So that's when we get into trouble. And this question of context, faith in context is a blessing. Faith out of context is a curse. This concept that faith can mean both things, going back to what Sharon was talking about, this is a really Greek idea, right? The concept of tragic inversion is the concept that the same thing that is your great gift that can make everything better in a healthy context, if you find yourself in the context of the state that the Greeks called tragic inversion, then that exact same gift becomes a curse on you and everybody else. It is that Oedipus was the greatest of the Thebans, that he did so much damage to Thebes. If he were a mediocre person and he were made king, he couldn't have done much damage. But he was an exceptional person. And being an exceptional person, when he was in a state of tragic inversion, all his gifts, his great gifts, turned into great curses. And this is how it is with Homo sapiens and with fideism. Faith in the right context is this great gift. But because it's a great gift, in a tragic inversion, it becomes a great curse. And he's without saying the words, in sentences 1 through 3, he's basically saying that faith is as vulnerable as any other part of the human condition to being inverted through tragedy into being a vice. And if we understand that, then we can help to ensure that faith in our lives remains a virtue. We can think about the context and make sure that our faith is always being expressed within the healthy, harmonizing context in which it gets to be a virtue. But if we don't understand this about faith, if we think it is just an unalloyed good that can only do good and can never be bad, the way moderns tend to think about good versus bad, then it virtually guarantees that we're eventually going to blunder into some state of tragic inversion and fail to recognize that this is not the moment for faith. This is the context where faith is going to screw us, and we need to step back from it. But we won't be able to, because instead we've made a cult out of faith. When we try to oversimplify the world into good people and bad people and good things and bad things, good situations and bad situations, we are making cults out of each of those things. We're trying to reduce them down to essential principles when they're not. Treating something that's not an essential principle as an essential principle turns it into a kind of demonism. And it's as true for faith as it is for sugar. Little bit, ask any baker, a little bit of sugar in the right place could do wonders. But if you just become an endless sweet tooth, relentlessly pounding back the sugar, now it's a curse. Everything, everything has to have the right context and balance, or else. And fideism, he's arguing implicitly in sentences 1 through 3, he's saying fideism is the state in which we are rejecting including faith in our lives in a balanced way, in a harmonizing way. And we're insisting that it will be our master. And because of that insistence, we've guaranteed to set up situations sooner or later in our life. Kairos, time will bring a situation of tragic inversion where that was the wrong answer, but we're going to insist on it anyway. And at that moment, we will do great ill in the world. This is kind of what he's saying here. Ari, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I wanted to consider, again, you're bringing up the levels of complexity, and I'm not discounting anything that's being said. I wanted to more look at the nuance of, and we've brought this up here, like Hannah Arendt says, it's almost the exact opposite sometimes. When you're talking about, like, was it Eichmann who did all this ordinary? He was so mundane. He was the exact opposite of the excellent and greatness that you're talking about with Odysseus. And look at the awful harm he did, right? And it's also sort of like faith gone wrong. It's like if he had a different kind of faith, that could have gone differently. But I mean, he is who he is, right? So you get certain kind of faith and a certain kind of mundane person at the right time in the right place. It's not so simple as it makes a great person and only Odysseus could bring down the fort. Like apparently, and guy who just managed, again. So yeah, I mean.
That's a very interesting point. Yes, yes, the mediocrity of Eichmann, and yet the great evil he was capable of doing. That's I'm going to think about that, Ari. Thank you. I certainly don't have a quick answer, and it's something that I'm keen as Ari knows I'm keenly interested in. I'm ramping up to do a second book club, this one about the origins of totalitarianism, and it'll include Eichmann and Jerusalem and a number of other writings in it as well. And so I'm all the time. I've got on my phone. I've got the audiobook of Origins of Totalitarianism. I'm playing it over and over and thinking about what she says. And I've got Eichmann and Jerusalem on there, and I'm playing it over and over and thinking about what she says. And I will now factor that in, Ari, and think about that, the role of excellence and mediocrity and what Eichmann was able to achieve. And Geneva asks, is he Eichmann where she came up with her term banality of evil? Yeah, it is. It is the very last sentence of her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she ends with, I can't remember the rest of the sentence. I really want to get to where I can rattle the whole thing off the top of my head from memory. But literally, the very last words are she's talking about the way that we were expecting monsters, but instead we failed to understand could how much could be done, how much we were going to suffer because of the banality of evil. Period. The end of her book. It's literally the last word on the subject that she gives in her book is that phrase applied to Eichmann. And it's understandable that after thousands of years of being prepared for a devil who's the scariest thing anybody ever saw and is, like trying to be a second god, he's an angel, he has superpowers, he's terrifyingly, proficient and skilled and a worthy adversary, and instead we get Eichmann. The man who can't even keep his story straight from 1 hour to the next. Uh, I've written a bunch of stuff on Facebook, and I'm going to bring back for the book club on this subject. But the way she talks about during his testimony and the interviews with him before that by the police, that he just couldn't seem to believe in anything. He could seem to passionately believe in something for the first hour, maybe the second hour. But if you kept talking to him all day long, his passion would run down and his subjects would change. And next thing you know, he might be talking equally, like he'd tell you he admired the Jews and he was their best friend and he was trying to help them. And you listen to him, and later he seems to believe what he's saying. But earlier he was describing how he exterminated millions of them. And how is this the same guy? And as Arendt said, you're expecting some sort of Darth Vader here who is dedicated to evil, and instead you've got this guy who can't even keep his thoughts straight from 1 hour to the next. For those of you looking for where to pick up the audiobook, I recommend Chirp. It's a website, and you can get the audiobook from Chirp. The narrator is really great. She passed away a couple years ago, but she's fantastic. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Angelina was wondering about, using the Greeks so much, and I was sort of explaining that Kenneth's using the Greeks as the foil for the modern, along with the medieval. You could use others, but for the Western mind, the object lesson became the Greeks, because the Greeks, like dear old Nietzsche, were really good at telling everybody how wonderful they were, and you had to believe them. But you look at the origins of the Greeks. They were pirates. They weren't as sophisticated as the Middle Eastern peoples they were trying to trade with. This led to a trade imbalance. The Levant had nice stuff, and the Greeks just had crap. But then they found they could export violence. But anyway, this is the Greeks. This difference between the Middle Eastern peoples and the Greeks live in a culture where it pays to be arrogant. You have to be ready to top the other guy, or you could be in trouble. It's not. It's the law of the sword. It's not the law of the magistrate. So the Greeks have got this arrogant attitude, and they're going to say, well, the best of all things in the world is Greek, my own hometown. Of course, they go to Egypt and they look at all these little Egyptian people who aren't as warrior-like as the Greeks. The Greeks probably got that right. They're the better thug when it comes to meeting the Egyptians. But they're looking at all the stuff the Egyptians have got, and the Greeks are probably saying, we can equal all of this. We can do what they're doing, but you're walking along and breezing along, and some guy says, oh, look, a mountain. Oh, that's nice. Oh, it's got snow on it. Let's climb up. It's a bit hot. Let's climb up that mountain and we'll get cool. Walking closer. Hey, dude, that's no mountain. That's a pile of rocks. That's the biggest pile of rocks I've ever seen. Now, Oedipus could mean many things, but the Sphinx, in part, could be this shocking experience. I mean, got this big pile of rocks, you thought you knew what a pile of rocks was, but this is a really, really stupendous pile of rocks. It's exceeded your idea of how big a pile of rocks should be by several factors. And then you got the Sphinx grinning at you. And it's that shocking, you must have felt the earth fall away from your feet to be not used to that. And I mean, of course you're going to go blind. The safest space is this. This is the safe space. And you're going to walk away with a walking stick from that, because your back will be bent with grief or with shock. But anyway, the Greeks really took the ideas from the Middle East and perfected on them. Now, something that happened in the Middle East, which worked against new ideas, which had been happening in the Middle East for a long time, was empire. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, at first when they create an empire, we can put all the different traditions together and they're all excited. And then they start to discover that ideas are dangerous to stable empires. Empires will try to enforce a monoculture. There's not much scope for new ideas there. It pays in an empire to toe the rope. But the Greeks, because they were balkanized, if one state didn't like you, you could always creep along to another state that didn't know you too well. But when the Greeks became an empire, you know, dear old Alexander, they said, oh, this is great. We can mix all the traditions together, build the great library. Oh, yeah, it's fabulous. And then about 100 years later, they realized all the trouble it was causing, that the librarians were troublemakers. They interfere with the smooth operation of empire. And you look at Greco-Roman history from then on, it's a history of empire, and it's a history that works against different perspectives and new ideas because it's an empire. Then you look at what happened in medieval Europe, heavily balkanized. It's a safe space for new ideas, but the rest of the old world were empires, and empires don't like new ideas. Now, where we've gotten in the West now, and this is where we've flipped over, is the West became an empire, and it's starting to discover that ideas are dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I was going to share here the in answer to Geneva's question, I pulled up Eichmann in Jerusalem, and here's the final two paragraphs. I have to break the next to last one into two pieces just because of the length restrictions in the chat here. But there's the first half of the next to last paragraph. Here's the second half of the next to last paragraph. And then here is the final sentence. And yes, it was as though in those last minutes he was summing up the lesson that this long course in human wickedness had taught us, the lesson of the fearsome, word and thought defying banality of evil. And it's talking about, as you can see in the last paragraph, it's talking about how Eichmann went to his death in a weird way, as though what he were doing were noble, except not. He sort of was inconsistent, and she talks in the book a lot about the way his brain loved cliches, and he would get really attached to and excited about cliches for a while, until he would run down and then like not mention them and move on to something else. And in his final moments, he had a few cliches there that cheered him up and made him feel like he was somewhere else and not about to be hanged. And she's the same, and what she's pointing out is the same weird, stupid clownishness that characterized his whole career was there right up until his very last moments. His inability to stand for anything except in a cliche, unconvincing way. His inability to be existential, his inability to be in the moment and fully alive to the moment and present for the moment, and instead of sort of playing a shell game and hiding in different. Anyway, it's remarkable, and it's why she ends the book the way she does with the phrase she does. It's like even his death was weirdly clownish and caricatured and cliche. He's just he and as she talks about in this book and in Origins of Totalitarianism, it's because people who enter these movements destroy their personalities. It's the only way to survive within the movement. Your personality gets shattered into fragments. And it has to, because you have to be able to adapt to your dear leader's day-to-day changing commandments. And his commands are inconsistent from one day to the next. So if you stand for anything or believe in anything or fight for anything, you get purged or murdered, because sooner or later you'll come up against the dear leader. The people who survive are the ones who, no matter how contradictory what the leader says today is from what he said yesterday, you have to be able to believe it with all your heart today, even though yesterday you believed the opposite with all your heart. And doing that day after day after day when your survival is at stake, the only people who survive that are people who end up, she describes it as being not having a character of their own that was broken long ago. And instead, they're like big bags of personality fragments that just sort of, when they're animated by a wind, will rearrange themselves into whatever convenient shape is right for that day. But then because it's not a real character, it can't hold its shape when the wind is gone. It falls slack again. And thus their life is just sort of this weird form of human character that is perhaps, and this is a hypothesis that I'm going to entertain when I do the book club to explore together, it is perhaps a fourth mode of personality other than the three that the Greeks recognized. It is perhaps neither Banausic nor Dulic nor Aristic. It may be a new fourth kind of character type. Certainly, Arendt believed it was a fourth kind of character type. And that's why she did the study on Eichmann, is to see, is this what we have here? Some new kind of thing that is neither fully driven by appetites nor by ideologies, but only by an external leader and can't maintain any shape without him. It's interesting. Anyway, so let's go to sentence 4 in paragraph 5 of Kenneth's text. We have enough time. I think we can. We're going to get it, Sharon. We're going to do it. We're going to get into sentences we haven't gotten to yet. I swear, we're going to do it. All right, sentence 4. This is the last one we covered. It lives wholly, fideism lives wholly in the domain of inner currents, of a wish world structured on puerile emotionalist reactions, desire for paternal approval, fear of eternal torment, and the heaven and hell that these project. And it cannot begin to ask itself whether these are really ultimately morally true or spiritually responsible points of view. And a quick aside, Stephen's question, is Eichmann a typical German? Arendt would say, no, nothing typical about that. But it is typical of people who survived and thrived within the Nazi movement. The ones who didn't have Eichmann's deformed, crippled character type, they either died or were purged. So there are lots of Germans who didn't conform to this type, but those Germans who did not conform were not allowed into the inner circle. The inner circle was all made up of Eichmann's, is her hypothesis, and that you know it's a you know it is she says it is something that it's she would say Nazism's relationship to Germany is like cancer's relationship to your body. It's on the one hand, it's part of you, but on the other hand, it does not have your best interests at heart, and it doesn't characterize the behavior of the rest of your cells. The rest of your cells are not also cancerous. It was the conditions that made it possible to erupt. But again, we'll dig into that. So what Kenneth's talking about here is this issue of the problem with fideism is that your relationship to faith is supposed to be its faith is supposed to be coupled with the ability to question yourself. Faith is an enormous gift when it is in a dialectical relationship with self-questioning. I mean, then you get profound capacity for spirituality. But if you remove the capacity to question yourself and you turn faith into a cult object, it warps itself into fideism. And in the form of fideism, you are now not questioning yourself. You're saying, I will to believe that this is true. I need it to be true, and therefore it is true. My hope moves beyond hope and moves into insistence. And at that stage, it becomes a toxic thing. And in that toxic thing, the reason that it's toxic is Socrates, as Plato summarizes him, sums up the core of the issue, which is human beings are very complicated and we are full of strengths and weaknesses. And it is our responsibility to figure out what our weaknesses are and do something about them. And each of us has different weaknesses, even though we share some as a species. People in a common culture will share some common weaknesses. But as individuals, we each have our own characteristic constellation of strengths and weaknesses. And part of growing up is taking ownership of those weaknesses and saying, yeah, I do have this problem, and I am going to do something about that problem. It's my problem, mine. And I can't expect other people to clean up after my messes. I have to do that. And that requires an examined life. As Socrates says, when he says the unexamined life is not worth living for a human being, he's talking about this. What kind of person will not study himself enough to learn how to own his own bullshit? If you can't own your bullshit, you're telling everybody else that they have to be the parents and you're just going to be the kid who's making messes left and right. And it's unacceptable. Who wants to be around you? Right? Just a big flaming dumpster fire of problems. It's to be if you're going to be a flaming dumpster fire of problems, you want to be a flaming dumpster fire of problems. Who knows he's a flaming dumpster fire of problems? And says, I am sorry. Allow me to list for you all of the problems that are on fire in the dumpster that is me. Fair warning. And you can try to work around them, and I'm going to try to do something about them, but they're my problems, and I'm not going to blame you for the consequences of my flaming dumpster of problems. That's what an adult does. It's not that they don't have any problems, it's that they acknowledge them. And they're always on the hunt for more because none of us knows ourselves perfectly. And this is the examined life. And faith can be an enormous benefit to this process, right? Of trying to be a better person. It can be incredibly important. But if you turn it into a cult object and it becomes fideism, then out the door, out the window goes self-examination. It becomes the will to impose your will on the cosmos, to impose your will on God and make him be who you need him to be. And at that point, how are you ever supposed to grow up as a human being? How are you going to take ownership of your problems when you're busy insisting that you are who you wish you were, who you hope you were, instead of acknowledging who you actually are? Go ahead, Sharon.
Isn't that the escapist?
Yes. That's why he calls it a form of escapism. Exactly right. That's what makes it dangerous. So that, escapism is all well and good. As Stephen has pointed out, there are times in our lives when a little escapism is therapeutic. Being relentlessly confronted with, I think it's Nietzsche, right? It talks about the hard truth that kills us because it's too toxic, it's too hard to face all the time. A certain leavening of escapism is a good thing. But if escapism
Schopenhauer as well, when he looked at his paintings in the art museum and had a transcendental experience, he said that made life worth living.
Yes, exactly. But that's, of course, that's escapism in a healthy balance. It's when escapism again becomes a cult object. It becomes a kind of object of insistence that we always escape and never deal with reality. Now all of a sudden we're back to being the flaming dumpster fire that's in complete denial. Or as Angelina points out in the comments, the parent who comes to the parent-teacher conference and insists that their little charming bundle of joy has never done anything wrong and has no flaws. And if anything's going wrong, it must be you, bad teacher. How come you're not doing everything? And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. If you're teaching your kid they don't ever have to grow up and they can just throw temper tantrums, we're going to have a bad relationship, and that's just how it's going to be. Go ahead, Sharon. I saw you had your hand up again.
A tincture of time is the cure for escapism because reality always bites. Just give it some time.
There's the voice of experience. Joe, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
First, I had a PTSD moment there when you just brought up the parent teacher, because like it was the opposite in my household. Like the teacher could pull a gun out and point it to my head and I would still be wrong. So it was like the exact opposite, that if it was never, the teacher was never wrong. So there are those extremes. So no, but I think that I think that this is the opposite of human flourishing, and I think it's an important point. And because what happens is once you become you're no longer doing any kind of self-examination, you're just trying to fit into a category per se. This is where almost you start to see this positivism, like kind of where everything's a cog in a machine. And so everything becomes really mechanized within that process. And so that ultimately not only encourages to self-evasion, facing any kind of uncomfortable truths or anything along those lines, it actually rewards it. And so I mean, when you think about it from those terms, it's really a perverted way of kind of looking at the world. And again, it's the opposite of what it really means to be a human being. And when I say that, what then gets rewarded, right? We've talked about this in the past, the incentives that start to emerge from that. That it's no longer about the relationships between you and the individual, it becomes about the objects. And so that you start to see this whole thing where once you're distracted from actually this human flourishing, this internal reflection, how that can actually lead to other types of behaviors and rewards and incentives that can be extremely destructive, both to you as an individual and as a society as a whole. So
That's right. Yeah, there's a I've been saying dialectical a lot recently. I'm going to go back to the Greek to get us out of that. There is a palintropic relationship between students and teachers in a healthy relationship. And this is palantropos from Heraclitus, where he says there is a people fail to recognize that there is a harmony in the dissonance, that there is a power in the bending back when two things that are in opposition are instead harnessed together, and then you get the case of the bow or the lyre. You can shoot an arrow with a bow because the wood and the string are in a palintropic, bent back relationship. Their forces are harnessed to each other. Or in the case of the lyre, again, the string and the wood are pulling on each other, and that palintropos or that palintropy creates the tension that makes work possible or beauty, music possible. And so this was always what I was taught in my childhood dojo. I've read since about toxic dojos, and I realized how much I lucked out to get one of the old traditional ones. But in a traditional dojo, the teacher is not claiming to be the guru. The teacher is claiming to be the student who got there first. And they've studied longer than you have, and they can share with you what they've learned and try to help you. But in the course of doing that, they learn too, not just from you and your questions, which granted is, an important source of learning for teachers, but even in just trying to, it forces them to re-examine what they've taken for granted. And
right.
in that re-examination, they make discoveries about things that they missed in their training. It's not just an educational process. It's a self-re-educational process to teach something. Um, when it's done, when it's healthy. But as you point out, Joe and Angelina, it can go wrong either way. If either half of the palintropic relationship refuses to participate and insists that it can do no wrong, you get one or the other form of toxicity, and it's no longer a genuine educational context.
And there's this other aspect of that I was even thinking about in terms of like I was only taking orders, like the responsibility. That's the Eichmann. This is the banality of evil too. Is that I was doing what I was doing my job. Right. There's a lack of responsibility when you stop to look internally, and the ability to not have to reflect back on oneself. You can kind of start to distance yourself from the responsibility of making decisions, and that responsibility is key to someone to saying, well, maybe this isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I recall some of Alexander Lowen's work. He was a Reichian therapist. He spoke about this sort of evolution. He said a lot of withdrawn people are people that had parents whose reaction to their coming into existence was cold. And, they felt the child was a burden, and therefore they tend to always put the child down and say, you're the problem. But he said there's also another state which was rooted in this initial coldness, where at a certain point, the parent turned around and started, an emotional or perhaps sexual investment in the child. They'd been the cold parent, and then suddenly they flipped, went the other way, and began to invest an enormous amount of emotion and sort of an almost sexual admiration for their child. Well, Lowen's very much into rock stuff. And this promotes narcissism, and they become the parent where the kid is always right against everybody else. But this is the interesting thing, that opposite attitude actually started out he claims, in the same emotional coldness, that creates the withdrawn person. Only they've flipped it. Its foundations are the same, is what he's saying. It's like the statue in the Daniel's dream that has a feet of clay. The same bad foundation. Thank you.
Well, that's right on, right? I mean, if you think your child could do nothing right, you're failing to see your child for who they really are. But in the same way, if you think your child can do nothing wrong, you're still failing to see your child for who they truly are. In both cases, the parents there's an element of narcissism in both cases, where the parents sort of erasing or overlaying the actual child in front of them with their own fantasy, whether negative or positive, about the child. It's parenting is hard, right? Now, how do you let this person be who they actually are and try to help them when we ourselves are so full of our shames and concerns and hopes and dreams and ideas and theories? I hadn't run into Alexander Lowen before. I've read a lot of psychology, but I missed him. Thank you. I put him in the chat for those who want to follow up. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, since we've been derailed by Eichmann, I want to make some contribution here that I think is Smithian, that there's, it's almost like we're talking too much about Eichmann. There's the concept of the sort of industrialization of evil, very much like Henry Ford industrialized the manufacture of automobiles. Is you want to take the evil process and break it up into such small parts that for any given part, it's ambiguous what its moral thing might be. And Eichmann was certainly correct. Eichmann said, it's in the book, I never killed anyone. And he didn't. He was exactly factually correct. And when countries outside the Reich would accept Jewish migration from the Reich, he scheduled trains that went there, that took the Jews out of the Reich. The goal was that the Reich should be Jew-free. When these other countries stopped accepting, sometimes because they'd been conquered, but in any case, when it came to the point where he had no place outside the Reich to send the Jews, he sent them where he was told. Schedule the trains to go here. Schedule the trains to go there. And he did. He didn't make the decision about killing the Jews. He scheduled trains. And he apparently was very good at it. He understood the railroad system. I don't know. So, as much as we should be concerned about whether Eichmann was sort of banausic or whatever, the ability of states to set up, to industrialize processes of modernity, to industrialize processes, to break something profoundly evil into tiny tasks, each of which are at best morally ambiguous and probably morally totally neutral. Like I put the wheels on the truck. I don't load the truck with Jews or drugs or guns or anything. We just, I lift boxes. What is there? I think that's the point I've heard Kenneth make over and over and over. Eichmann teaches us about the industrialization And by that, I don't know if he exactly used the word industrialization, but this breaking down the process into small parts that I wouldn't say good men, but fairly average men can perform without qualms. They can say, hey, I take care of my family, I've raised my kids, we have a house, and I schedule trains. Thank you very much. So maybe we never resolve Eichmann. Eichmann's sort of a window, a guy that we could look through to see what this industrialization process looks like. You have to go to something like what the Wannsee conference or something like that to see what the architects of this system were thinking. Not what, I mean, Eichmann was a cog in the machine built by other people. And we can learn, we can get through Eichmann what it's like to be in the machine and looking around and seeing out. But there's also the clearly moral dimension of constructing a machine to do this, constructing a process in modernity. And now I'm gonna stop talking again.
I think about how what Ford did was so lauded because people with minimal training could do one of those steps over and over all day long. They didn't have to know a damn thing about how to build a car, but if they could screw in this bolt, then they could do that all day long, and it contributed to making a car, and it allowed them to train people faster to do the work. But of course, the downside is that repetitive stress injury on the one hand, right, from doing the same damn thing over and over, your body doesn't want to do the same thing over and over for 12 hours a day. But also it kills your brain to do the same damn thing over and over. Heraclitus warns about this. Doing the same thing over and over, it's a burden. It begins to rule you. It changes you. It restructures you. And it's why, for example, the Saturn plant, one of their big innovations at Saturn was to do the reverse assembly line where the worker goes with the car from beginning to end. And does all of the different steps or a lot of the different steps, and the consequence is that the work is not as mind numbing and banal and boring to do. You feel more of a sense of ownership, and thus you care more and you do a better job because you're paying more attention, you're more alive and engaged. And so there's a way in which the Henry Ford approach to industrialization, which I think you aptly describe as what the Nazis were putting together for exterminating all the people they didn't like. It had that quality of taking something that had an enormous value proposition where we should be feeling strongly about something, but reduced it down to something boring, a whole bunch of little boring steps. And, only if you were really unlucky did you get one of the steps they couldn't figure out how to make entirely, entirely boring. But they really did their best to, make it possible for as many people as possible to engage in the evil without ever having their conscience engaged. It's like, yeah, all I do is I stamp numbers. Oh, well, all I do is I type these cards up. Oh, well, all I do is I put these cards in the computer. Everybody just has their little step that they do. And consequences be damned.
Would require assembly line kind of work during Greek Heraclitus period. Well,
Yeah, they knew nothing about that. Their life didn't work like that at
okay,
all.
but he said he was warning people that he just says he was warning people.
Oh, Heraclitus was just warning people about doing the same thing repetitively over time is boring. The Greeks did not go in for that sort of thing.
Right. I can't imagine what Greeks would have done that would require, work that was repetitious.
The hard labor of society that they had all their slaves doing. That was
um,
probably him, among other things, dissing slaves and their minds as being broken by having to do the same boring thing over and over and over. But it's apt, it's a foreshadow for the Henry Ford method of industrialization. Angelina, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, thanks to Donald for bringing that layer to it and making it a little bit bigger than Eichmann. Before, I think I I just questioned something about, and Stephen brought that up about Greek philosophy. I do find it interesting that Eichmann, I don't want to critique, of course, all of Western epistemology, but that Eichmann is somehow the poster boy of absolute evil. It kind of reminds me of the fact that Western culture is very much engulfed by this kind of post-Holocaust era. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but for example, in my field of studies, in literary studies, what is foundational is Theodore Adorno's famous phrase, right? That to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, as if no other benchmark of evil after Eichmann or the Holocaust kind of doesn't exist. So I find the whole conversation, especially because I live in the Levant and I'm half Levantine, I find it very perplexing, to the point that actually at international literary conferences, such claims have been made that the Holocaust is like the last narrative of tragedy, for example, all sorts of weird things. But certainly Adorno's phrase came to mind because it is basically rammed into our heads in all, basically in the humanities. So just to add to that, because Eichmann is, as Donald pointed out, really just a cog in the wheel, and the industrialization of evil goes beyond this, the so-called benchmark of the Holocaust.
Yes. Thank you for bringing up Adorno. His book, The Authoritarian Personality, is one that Kenneth always recommends, and it's on my to read list. I haven't read it yet. I've only read about it, and I might have to do it as part of the Origins of Totalitarianism book club, I suppose, because it's highly relevant. You're right to bring up his theories here. There's a way in quote Western civilization in which the Holocaust on the one hand haunts everything, but on the other hand, it's also the skeleton in the closet nobody wants to talk about. We don't want to teach it in elementary school. We don't want to talk about it much in the newspapers. The only time we trot out Nazis is when we're doing another Indiana Jones movie and we need a bad guy. And as Stephen has pointed out, that does not do us any service to understanding how and why any of it happened.
But you know, it's
So
interesting because I lived in East Germany for almost 5 years. I mean, Central Europe generally, or Eastern Europe, is until now, despite all of their government programs to acknowledge their own evil and so forth. I mean, you actually hear more anti-Semitism in that part of the world than in this part of the world. Like, anybody hears that I'm half Middle Eastern, oh my God, you must hate the Jews like us. No, I don't. Like, I've had people there, show me copies of what is that book called? The conspiracy book that was written in Russia. The Elders of Zion.
oh God, the protocols of the elders.
Yes, yeah. I've had people show me their copies, I mean, in German and Romanian. So, I mean, I've never had somebody gleefully show me a copy in Arabic or something. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes,
But yeah, I mean, all that good for like trying to look at their own history and acknowledge it and compensate it. It also seems rather performative. I don't really feel that.
yes.
Yeah.
That is exactly what Arendt said about the Nazis' embrace of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. In the Origins of Totalitarianism, she has some bitterly hilarious words to say about the extent to which the Nazi leadership didn't believe a word of the protocols, but they told everybody else to believe it. There was a big, as you say, it was performative. It's like this is part of the performance that we're giving. We're pretending to be these things because we think it'll get us power and allow our movement to spread, but we ourselves don't actually believe in it. It's yeah, it's weird. And it's weird that anybody would still be passing that thing around after it was exposed as a forgery ages ago. But what a weird world we live in. Sharon, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I want to, I'm not very happy with what Donald just said. I think industrialization applies to machines. And we sit here and we talk about character development. And to say that Eichmann was just sending trains, he certainly knew where the trains were going, just as he knew how many Jews he loaded onto that train. So that's a cop out, I think. And it's a cop out that I'm extremely uncomfortable with. We industrialize processes, we industrialize the making of cars, we industrialize farming, we don't industrialize harm to people. You know, I visited Auschwitz about 2 summers ago, and they made a movie called The Zone of Interest, which is about the story of Rudolf Hess, who lived right next door to Auschwitz. And of course, that was the industrialization of evil too, because his job every day was to pull up the spreadsheets and see how many Jews are going to go in the concentration camp. And when they didn't have enough for Auschwitz, then they built Birkenau, right? So industrialization of evil is poor human character, and it is exactly as it said, it's just evil.
Thank you,
That's
Shay.
my take.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah, she talks about these paradoxes in Eichmann and Jerusalem about on the one hand he knew, and on the other hand he would sometimes act like he didn't know. I mean, how would he go from we have to exterminate them and purify the race in 1 hour he'd be talking about that, and in another hour he's saying I'm their best friends and I tried to find them a new homeland, and he weirdly he spent years trying to find a homeland outside of Germany where all the Jews could move to and live, and he dedicated himself to it. And if he hadn't had the plug pulled on him by the change in policy, he might have successfully moved all the Jews to Madagascar, which was it was on his short list of places that he thought all the Jews could have a homeland in. And it's like, what does this guy actually believe in? Is the thing that she comes down in the end to saying, nobody in a totalitarian movement actually believes in anything.
So is that the duality of evil then?
There's
Does evil have a duality?
Yes. Yeah, at least this form of evil, the totalitarian form of evil that she talks about, it always presents itself as having a great mission and standing for something. But when you read all the private journals and diaries of the leaders behind it, they reveal they didn't believe in any of that stuff. And when you look at the behavior of someone like Eichmann, you can see him spend some years working his butt off trying to save all the Jews and give them a home outside of Germany. And then he spends the next several years trying to exterminate them as efficiently as possible. And you're like, how can the same person dedicate himself to one and then to the other? And this is where she reaches part of her conclusion about the totalitarian personality, which is that to be part of a movement like that destroys your character. You actually aren't an acorn that's going to grow into an oak anymore. You don't have an ethos in the way that the other three character types have ethoi.
Well, and that's where I have difficulty with it, because we're talking about optimization of your character to become an Aristoi.
Yeah.
And we're living in times now where we don't have Aristoi. And so it's easy to see, right? And I just have a great deal of difficulty. And that was such the Holocaust and all the other genocidal movements sometimes forced me to articulate what I really think. I think that man is basically evil, and the struggle is to be good. And that's not a healthy thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Greeks were certainly we typically describe the Greeks as misanthropic. From our perspective, they're misanthropic because moderns are like, man is the measure of all things. Nothing could be more nobler than the glorious gifts of the human intellect. We talk about these things in these, praise like ancients would give to gods, we give to human potential. And so to us, when we confront the Greeks, are going, wow, man is a real problem because man has some real issues. We think that must mean that the Greeks hated humanity, but they didn't. They just recognized that humanity is the most promising, but also the most threatening of all animals. It could be better than any other animal at its best, and it can be worse than any other animal at its worst. It has a more malleable character than any other species. And that malleability is both a promise for hope if you do anthropoculture and cultivate people into their best potential, but it's also a terror for the future if they are broken by a totalitarian movement and become these totalitarian personalities, then they might do anything. Nothing is beyond them. There's no floor below which they will go. And you can't say that about lions or crocodiles. You may not want to be torn to pieces by a Nile crocodile, but there are things a crocodile will do, and there's things a crocodile will not do. There are things you're safe from with a crocodile, and you can't say that about a person. Each person has to be judged one at a time. There's no telling what that person will do. And so certainly they wouldn't agree that man is evil and the struggle is to be good, but they would agree that man can be good or evil, and the struggle is to try to avoid the evil side and try to push towards the good side. And any culture that isn't putting an enormous amount of its energy and effort and creativity towards doing that is a culture that's not going to be around for very long, because, people can be such a mess.
I'm just saying, when I look at those genocidal movements, that's the thought that comes to my mind, because it hasn't happened one time. It's a repetitive occurrence throughout history. I mean, my name is Sharon Towns, and I was part of a genocidal movement to slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go.
Yeah. We'll come back to these topics. I know we're just about out of time. I'm going to give Stephen, he's got his hand up. I'll give you the last word for today. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just bring up that point, which you're probably aware of. Somebody came up with this point, and it's quite interesting that until a certain point, the God was Jesus for the West. And the God Jesus was one you looked up to. You knew you would never equal Jesus, but you would try to emulate some of his qualities. That was Western history for, I don't know, almost 2,000 years. And then along came Hitler. Jesus had been thrown out of the picture. And now the West has deified Hitler as the supreme demon. And what it says instead, if I'm not Hitler, I'm okay. One's a formula for self-overcoming. Remember, Nietzsche is still in the improving on yourself. What does not kill me makes me stronger. And the other new worship is about forgiving yourself and just remaining who you are, never seeking to improve on yourself, because if you're better than Hitler, you're okay. You don't have to go another step. Just stay as you are. This is the new religion of the West with the grand demon Adolf.
I'm okay, you're okay.
that bar is too low, Stephen.
Exactly.
The bar is way too low and unrealistic. But that's the banality of evil right there.
And I think Stephen's point is it has also created in us a banality of good, in which our idea of good is anything better than Hitler's just fine. It's like, oh my God. I'm going to remember this for the future. Anyway, that's all we've got for today. I hope you all had a lovely time. I certainly did.
Thank you, Rick.
See you next week, Donald.
Yes, Sharon. Thank you.
Okay, take care, everybody.
You always correct me.
I'm not correcting you. I'm just expressing another viewpoint. There's no correction here. That's why we're here.
Oh, I want to live an examined life. You're welcome to examine me.
No, I don't have that authority.
Everyone does.
Bye, everyone.
Well, I don't give anybody else permission. Bye.